Catherine Harris, at 34 years old, had never considered herself remarkable in appearance or style. She kept her black hair cropped just below the chin, a practical cut that suited her understated nature. At 5'6", with a slim build and soft brown eyes, Catherine embodied a quiet confidence that stemmed more from her values than any craving for attention. She worked as a human resources consultant at Horizon Enterprises, an unflashy position that she had held for 7 years. In a city as bustling and dynamic as Seattle, HR consulting was not the most glamorous career path. Yet, within the walls of Horizon's glass-paneled offices, Catherine's reputation was that of an empathetic, fair-minded professional whom many colleagues turned to for guidance. She was married to Michael Harris, a man 6 years her senior, whose achievements in the tech investment world had earned him significant wealth. Most people in their circle knew Michael as the founder of Harris Investments, a name that carried considerable weight in the city's entrepreneurial scene. Despite this, Catherine prided herself on maintaining a modest lifestyle, still driving a 5-year-old Honda Civic, choosing comfortable flats over designer heels, and favoring department store blouses over runway brands. She had grown up believing that one's worth was measured by character, not by price tags. The contrast between Catherine's approach and the reality of her marriage was a constant undercurrent in her life. Michael had never pushed her to change. On the contrary, he appreciated her grounded perspective. Still, the difference often became visible during family gatherings, especially those attended by Michael's mother, Eleanor Harris. Eleanor, now 65, was a socialite whose circle spanned charity galas, art auctions, and exclusive garden parties. Although never outright hostile, Eleanor's polite remarks often hinted that she found Catherine's choices too unassuming for the wife of a man like Michael. One brisk Monday morning at Horizon Enterprises, Catherine moved between cubicles, answering quick questions from colleagues who needed her input on a hiring policy update. While she was respected for her diligence, she was also known for her calm demeanor and down-to-earth presence. Several co-workers had teased her about her faithfulness to that Honda Civic, light-hearted remarks about how maybe it's time for a fancier set of wheels. Catherine would smile, but rarely respond with more than a shrug. She never felt compelled to justify her preference for practicality over status. That afternoon, she was called into a meeting with her department head, Jonathan Parker, to discuss upcoming changes to company-wide training sessions. Once the meeting concluded, he casually mentioned hearing from someone in accounting that her car had needed extensive repairs. "It's just that your job demands you be all over town for recruitment and employee events," he said, a note of genuine concern in his voice. Catherine assured him she would manage, but the reminder ignited a swirl of unease in her mind. Driving home later, she clenched the steering wheel of her Civic a little tighter, listening to the whirring sound that had grown more persistent over the last couple of weeks. It was still raining, as it often did in Seattle, and her wipers strained to keep the windshield clear. Her father, a retired mechanic in Portland, used to say that strange car noises were like subtle cries for help. She felt a pang of guilt for neglecting those cries, though she reminded herself that repairs weren't cheap. The smell of burnt rubber hit her nostrils as she pulled into her driveway in Madison Park, the neighborhood where she and Michael had chosen to buy a home. The house was elegant but not ostentatious, large windows to welcome sunlight, a modest garden with lavender and rose bushes. She parked in the driveway, grabbed her purse, and rushed inside to avoid the chilly drizzle. Inside, the lights glowed warmly. The contrast between the unassuming exterior and the refined interior reflected the harmony she and Michael had reached in their life together. She found him in his study, a spacious room lined with books on technology, economics, and philanthropy. He was on a conference call, but he gave her a quick smile of acknowledgement. Catherine set her things down and tried to ignore the nagging thought that something would soon have to give with her beloved but failing Civic. She could still hear its rumble echoing in her head, an unwelcome sign that the car was on its last legs. She wanted to preserve that sense of normalcy she valued, but reality was pressing in on her preferences. Unbidden, the memory of Eleanor's disapproval nudged into her consciousness, making her wonder whether this was yet another moment where her simple choices would be scrutinized. And as the rain continued to fall outside, Catherine realized that the next steps in her life, whether she liked it or not, might involve confronting the very trappings of wealth and privilege she had always tried to keep at arm's length. She couldn't know yet that the trouble with her car was only the beginning of a deeper journey, one that would challenge her convictions and reshape the way she viewed herself in a world that so often measured value by appearances. Yet for that night, she simply exhaled, put the kettle on, and waited for Michael to finish his call, determined to cling to her sense of balance just a little longer. Sunlight filtered through half-drawn curtains when Catherine woke the next day, a soft glow that briefly made her forget about all her worries. She stretched, savoring those first quiet moments before her mind began to buzz with daily tasks. Slipping on a robe, she padded down the hallway to find Michael at the kitchen island, scanning emails on his tablet. A faint aroma of coffee filled the air. "Morning," she greeted, planting a quick kiss on his cheek. He returned her greeting with a warm smile, but instantly noticed the tightness around her eyes. Catherine had never been good at hiding her emotions from him. "Everything okay?" Catherine sighed. "I might need to replace the Civic," she admitted. "It stalled again yesterday." Michael closed his tablet and leaned forward with concern. "It's not safe for you to be on the road if it's giving you that much trouble," he said. "You know how I feel about this. Get whatever car makes you happy. I'll go with you, or at least have Thomas drive you so you won't be stranded." Thomas Chen was Michael's trusted assistant, a man as discreet as he was efficient. Usually, Catherine appreciated his willingness to help, but she couldn't ignore how being driven around felt like stepping into a realm of privilege that made her uneasy. She shook her head. "I can handle it," she replied. "I just need to get to a dealership and see what's out there." Michael studied her face, as though trying to decipher a deeper hesitation. "We have the means, Kath. You don't have to drive something that might break down on the freeway. Why not treat yourself to something safer and more reliable? Maybe even a luxury crossover if that's what you want. You've worked hard enough." She raised a hand gently, cutting him off. "I know, and I'm grateful. But you know I don't need all that. I just want a dependable car that won't stop in the middle of the highway." Their conversation moved into more delicate territory when Catherine added, "I don't want to appear like I'm Mrs. Harris's who flashes money. That's never been me. And besides, people at the office already think we live in some kind of castle." Michael gave a short laugh, acknowledging the mismatch between his recognized status and her desire for modesty. "We do live in a nice neighborhood, Kath," he reminded her, "but it's not a castle." Before they could delve deeper, Catherine's phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an incoming call from Amber Wilson, her best friend since college. Amber, 33, had a knack for calling at precisely the right or wrong time. Catherine answered with a grin. "Morning, Amber. What's up?" A cheerful voice blasted through the speaker. "Hey, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in ages. You busy tonight? I was hoping we could catch up over dinner." Relieved to have a momentary diversion, Catherine agreed. "I'd love to. Maybe that sushi place downtown." "Perfect. See you around 7. Amber paused, her tone shifting. "But you sound off. Everything good?" Catherine forced a light laugh. "I'll fill you in later. Don't worry too much." After the call ended, Catherine noticed Michael watching her. "You know," he offered gently, "if you want me to step back and let you handle the car purchase alone, I will. Just remember, I'm here if you need me." She kissed him on the cheek once more in gratitude. "Thanks, Michael." Later that day, Catherine arrived at Horizon Enterprises and parked her Civic, hearing an unsettling rattle under the hood. The sense of urgency gnawed at her again. Her office was on the 8th floor, and the short elevator ride gave her enough time to mentally plan how she would carve out an hour or two to visit a dealership this week. Her schedule was packed with HR interviews and compliance meetings, but she was determined to fit it in. Inside her office, she found a note from Thomas asking if she needed him to arrange any appointments. She appreciated his thoroughness, but hesitated to rely on it. Catherine valued her independence, a trait deeply rooted in her upbringing. She also knew that stepping into a luxury dealership with a personal assistant might invite precisely the kind of attention she hoped to avoid. Throughout the morning, she alternated between drafting HR documentation and contemplating which dealership to visit. She had only ever bought used cars before, and she wondered if stepping into a more upscale space might lead to uncomfortable assumptions. Yet she reminded herself that her priority should be safety. This wasn't about ego, it was about practicality, and possibly letting herself acknowledge, just a little, that it was acceptable to own something newer if it meant peace of mind. By the time lunch rolled around, she resolved to act. She'd research a few dealerships, see what models aligned with her preference for simplicity, and then make a decision. She would do it alone, on her own terms, without the pressure of external judgments. It was a necessary step, she told herself, one that would keep her life moving smoothly in ways that truly mattered to her. The moment Catherine shut the door of her small office, her past and present seemed to collide. She had hardly settled into her desk when a flood of memories from her childhood in Portland rushed in. She recalled the cramped yet cozy apartment over her father's garage, the rattle of tools, and the smell of motor oil that always seemed to cling to his work clothes. Robert Thompson had taught her how to check tire pressure, change the oil, and even swap out spark plugs by the time she was old enough to drive. Though their finances were tight, the home was rich in affection and moral grounding. One particular incident hovered in her memory like a spectre. Catherine had been 15 when she witnessed a wealthier friend, Bianca, get publicly berated by her parents for overspending on clothes. The humiliation in Bianca's eyes, paired with her parents' rigid obsession over appearances, had left an impression Catherine never quite shook off. She vowed then that if she ever had more money, she would never allow it to dictate her sense of self or relationships. Yet here she was, decades later, married to a man whose fortune sometimes felt like an unwanted spotlight. She tried to treat that fortune as a minor backdrop in their marriage rather than the focal point. But social pressures could be relentless, especially when it came to Eleanor Harris. Her mother-in-law was the epitome of high society, often encouraging Catherine to showcase appropriate clothing or accessories at events. Catherine always resisted, politely but firmly. A ping from her computer pulled her out of her reverie. An email from Elena Martinez, her closest confidant at Horizon Enterprises. Elena, at 36, had an easy smile that brightened the dullest of workdays. Her message read, "Lunch, I'm craving Italian." With a relieved grin, Catherine typed back, "Count me in." Noon. They met an hour later in the lobby and walked down the street to a small Italian restaurant where the tangy aroma of tomatoes and basil greeted them at the door. Once they were seated with menus in hand, Elena leaned forward. "You've seemed preoccupied. Everything okay?" Catherine twirled a strand of her short hair, feeling the tension in her shoulders. "It's this car situation," she began, explaining how her Honda kept breaking down. "Michael wants me to consider something better, but I'm reluctant." It feels like a step into a world I've tried to keep at a distance. Eleanor nodded sympathetically. I get it. But you know, sometimes practicality has to win out. You're on the road a lot for our company visits. We can't have you stuck on the freeway. Catherine sighed. I know. I'm worried about looking like I'm flaunting money if I drive something really nice. Are you sure that fear isn't coming from something deeper? Elena asked softly. Your background. Feeling like you might lose your roots if you embrace a bit of the life Michael's built. Catherine paused, stunned by her friend's perceptiveness. She nodded slowly, swirling her iced tea absently. Maybe. I grew up watching how people act differently around money. I don't want to become someone who judges others by their clothes or cars. You won't, Eleanor reassured, sipping her water. Just don't let fear of judgment keep you from doing what's best. If you do choose a fancier car, it won't suddenly turn you into Eleanor Harris overnight. They shared a light laugh, though the mention of Eleanor lingered like a delicate cloud over the conversation. Elena deftly changed the topic, updating Catherine on office gossip. Someone in finance was rumored to be leaving for a rival company. Yet, even as they chatted, Catherine's mind returned to the weight of expectations. From Eleanor, from her colleagues, and from her own complicated internal gauge of what was right. When they returned to the office, Jonathan Parker approached Catherine with a new assignment. We've got a training session next week for some of our older employees who aren't used to the new HR software, he explained. I'd like you to lead it. You have a knack for bridging generational gaps. Catherine agreed, though she felt the mounting pressure of her own tasks. She politely excused herself and headed to her office. On her way, she passed a bulletin board where employees pinned personal announcements and items for sale. A flyer for a second-hand BMW caught her eye. She pondered the possibility. Was that a compromise? A used luxury car might be less flashy but more reliable than her Civic. Before she could dwell on it, her phone buzzed. The caller ID revealed her younger brother, David Thompson, 29, a struggling artist who periodically found himself in need of financial assistance. Catherine felt a familiar pang of protectiveness. He rarely called without reason, and part of her dreaded the request she might soon hear. Still, she answered. "Cat, hey," came David's hesitant voice. "I hate to bother you, but I'm behind on rent again." She listened, mentally tallying what she could spare this month, while saving enough for the inevitable car purchase. By the time the conversation ended, a faint headache threatened to overshadow her afternoon. She wished she could help everyone, David, her parents, even herself, without feeling like money was the unspoken yardstick for success or failure. As she walked back to her desk, she resolved not to let the demands of others dictate her choices. Yet that resolve felt precarious, the weight of expectations pressing down harder with each passing day. Catherine spent the next few days in a swirl of research that revealed her meticulous streak. A well-worn notepad on her desk bore the names and features of various car models: the Audi Q5, the BMW X3, a Lexus RX. She highlighted safety ratings, compared fuel economy, and read consumer feedback late into the night. The deeper she delved, the more she realized that stepping into a luxury dealership could be the logical path, especially given her commute and the frequent travel for work. But logic did little to quell the discomfort in her gut. Late Thursday evening, she wrapped up a video conference on diversity and inclusion for Horizon Enterprises. Part of her role was to ensure that employees felt valued regardless of background, a responsibility Catherine took to heart. Ironically, the training she was orchestrating on bias and stereotypes made her reflect on her own predispositions, how she, too, was judging wealthy environments, almost as if anticipating the worst. When the call ended, she sat in her silent home office, the laptop screen illuminating her face as the raindrops tapped gently against the window. Michael knocked softly on the half-open door before entering. "How was the call?" he asked. "It went well," she responded with a tired smile. "We're finalizing a workshop on unconscious bias. Funny how relevant it feels to, well, everything these days." He nodded, crossing his arms as he leaned against the doorframe. "Thomas mentioned you were looking into several dealerships. Any decisions yet?" She hesitated. "Not quite. The Elite Motors dealership in town has good reviews on certain models, but part of me wants to avoid the glitz. I keep picturing some pushy salesperson urging me to upgrade to something more extravagant just because I'm married to you." Michael frowned slightly. "I understand, but these places can surprise you. Some are actually respectful and not just trying to upsell. Besides, you shouldn't feel forced to hide who you are. And it's not about me or my investments. It's about you finding a safe, reliable car." She set her pen down and sighed. "I know, you're right. Maybe I'll just go tomorrow during my lunch break. No big announcements. I won't mention you or anything about our finances." Michael didn't push further. He kissed her forehead, wishing her a good night before heading upstairs. Catherine turned off the laptop, noticing she had received a missed call from Eleanor. She felt a twinge of apprehension at the prospect of listening to the voicemail. Finally, curiosity won out, and she played the message. "Catherine, dear," Eleanor's polished voice filled the room. "I hope you're well. There's an upcoming charity gala at the country club. Everyone important will be there. I want you and Michael to attend. And please consider wearing something befitting the family's standing. Let's make a good impression together." Catherine rubbed her temples, the tension creeping up her neck. While Eleanor's words sounded cordial, they carried a subtext that prickled her, an unspoken suggestion that Catherine's usual attire might fail to measure up to those polished standards. She debated calling back, but decided it could wait until the morning. Her priority was finalizing the car decision, not pacifying Eleanor's social concerns. Friday morning came with a crisp chill. Catherine dressed in her typical office attire, a simple blouse, dark slacks, and flats. Before leaving, she checked her phone to find a text from Thomas. "Let me know if you need a ride. I'm at your disposal." Politely, she declined. She appreciated his thoughtfulness, but wanted to manage this on her own. Once at Horizon Enterprises, she immersed herself in back-to-back interviews until midday. When her calendar showed a small opening around noon, she packed her notes on car models and decided this was as good a time as any to visit Elite Motors. She told Elena where she was heading, ignoring the playful wink her friend gave. "I hope they treat you right," Elena teased. "But if not, you know where to find me." Catherine shrugged on her jacket and headed out, a small flicker of nerves dancing in her stomach. She drove her sputtering Civic along the busy downtown streets, trying to ignore the clunking noise that seemed to have grown louder overnight. Rain threatened once again, dark clouds gathering above the skyline. In the back of her mind, she replayed the notion of bias, how people judge one another based on superficial signs like clothing or background. She had spent years proving her worth through hard work rather than flashy statements. Now, she braced herself for a situation that might demand she uphold those same principles in a setting not always known for subtlety. Pulling into the dealership's parking lot, she took a deep breath. This was just another errand, she reminded herself. A practical step towards safety and convenience, yet something in the pit of her stomach told her that her simple plan might not unfold as smoothly as she hoped. On that Friday morning, the Seattle rain had taken on a steady cadence, tapping against the pavement in a persistent rhythm. Catherine stood by the wide glass windows of her office, watching droplets blur the skyline. She was dressed in her usual understated style, blue jeans, a practical pair of white sneakers, and a simple North Face jacket she'd owned for years. With her notes tucked into a plain leather folder, She took a moment to mentally prepare for the trip to Elite Motors. Michael had checked in with her before she left home, gently asking if she'd changed her mind about letting Thomas drive her. She politely but firmly declined. Even in small matters, she guarded her autonomy, believing it gave her a sense of self separate from the trappings of wealth. Now, as she glanced at her phone to confirm directions, she felt an undercurrent of apprehension. Was she being stubborn, or simply true to her own values? She walked past several colleagues whose designer raincoats and glossy boots seemed more refined than her own outfit, but it didn't bother her. Catherine had long since decided appearances could be deceiving, yet she did notice the subtle glances from a few co-workers, likely noting how worn her sneakers looked in comparison. Brushing it aside, she focused on the fact that she was about to face an environment where appearances mattered perhaps more than anywhere else. Down at the parking garage, she unlocked her Honda Civic. The car rattled in protest when she turned the key in the ignition. "Just a little longer," she murmured, half to the car, half to herself. Pulling out into the street, she navigated toward the dealership, going over her mental checklist: safety features, price range, fuel efficiency. She purposely avoided any thoughts about brand prestige. Elite Motors was strategically located near the city's business district. Catherine arrived with 5 minutes to spare before her planned lunch break was over. Enough time, she hoped, to walk in and get a feel for the models she'd researched. The building's facade gleamed with polished metal, large windows showcasing rows of sleek vehicles inside. The lot was neat, empty of clutter, and dotted with luxury brands from Audis to BMWs and beyond. Catherine parked in a visitor's spot, feeling a slight sense of relief that no valet rushed out to take her keys. She was content to handle everything herself. With a deep breath, she walked in, determined to keep this a quick, straightforward visit. At first, she lingered near an Audi Q5, admiring its smooth lines and roomy interior through the windows. An eager conversation at the reception desk caught her attention. A pair of sharply dressed salespeople engaged in spirited banter with a tall, silver-haired man wearing an impeccable suit. The men laughed loudly, exchanging stories about high-end clients, all while ignoring Catherine's presence entirely. She didn't mind being left alone to browse. In fact, she preferred it. But minutes ticked by, and no one approached her or even offered a greeting. Eventually, Catherine began to feel an uncomfortable twinge in her stomach. She glanced around at the modern decor: sleek black floors, tasteful lighting, and framed posters of the dealership's Customer Experience Excellence Awards. The irony was not lost on her. After nearly 20 minutes, a voice from behind finally addressed her. "Ma'am, can I help you?" She turned to see Richard Warner, his salt and pepper hair styled neatly, his demeanor exuding a subtle arrogance. He wore a tailored suit that suggested he rarely encountered financial constraints of his own. Relieved that someone had finally spoken to her, she responded, "Yes, I'm interested in the Audi Q5. I'd like to know about its safety features and availability." Richard offered a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course. Although the Q5 is a bit on the higher side price-wise, we have more budget-friendly options." He gestured toward a section of pre-owned vehicles tucked in a corner of the showroom. "Might I suggest something there?" His tone, oily and condescending, pricked at Catherine's composure. She cleared her throat and stood a bit straighter. "I've done my research on the Q5, actually. Safety is my top priority. Is it available for a test drive?" But Richard's attention had already diverted. Another customer had just entered, a man in a designer suit, brandishing a sleek briefcase. Without a second glance at Catherine, Richard practically leapt across the showroom to greet him. "Sir, welcome back. Let me show you our latest models." Catherine felt her cheeks warming in a mix of embarrassment and irritation. For a moment, she considered announcing her background, dropping Michael's name or mentioning that she could pay cash if she wanted. Her pride flared, but a lifetime of valuing humility won out. She stepped away quietly, mentally coaching herself not to succumb to anger. Before exiting, she noticed a young woman among the sales staff, a brunette in a crisp blazer, looking her way with a sympathetic expression. The woman, whose name tag read Sophia, took a hesitant step forward, but was quickly redirected by another staff member to assist the suited customer. Feeling overlooked yet again, Catherine decided it wasn't worth the confrontation. She exited the dealership with her dignity intact, but her emotions in turmoil. Rain soaked her jacket as she hurried back to the Civic. Slipping into the driver's seat, she rested her forehead against the steering wheel for a moment. She thought of her father's simple wisdom, Michael's gentle encouragement, and the vow she had made to never let money change who she was. Though she tried to focus on the practicality of buying a new car, she couldn't shake the sting of that humiliating encounter. As she turned the key, the Civic sputtered before finally starting, as though echoing her mood. Catherine stared at the gleaming doors of Elite Motors one last time before driving off, determined to decide later whether she should have demanded better treatment or simply found another dealership altogether. When Catherine arrived at Elite Motors for the second time that rainy Friday, she took a longer moment to absorb her surroundings. Though she had visited just days before, her first experience had been so brief and frustrating that she hadn't fully registered the extent of the dealership's opulence. Now, stepping inside again, she caught the gleam of pristine floors polished to a mirror-like shine and breathed in the faint scent of expensive leather mingled with fresh espresso. Recessed lights along the ceiling illuminated the vehicles as if they were fine works of art on display. This time, she had come not so much to finalize a purchase, but to give Elite Motors one more chance to treat her fairly. When she'd left previously, she felt stung and overlooked. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that her experience might have been a fluke, the product of one salesman's arrogance. She reminded herself that no single person represented an entire organization. Perhaps if she encountered a different salesperson, someone who wouldn't judge her by her jeans, sneakers, or minimal makeup, she could walk away with a renewed sense of faith in customer service. As she took a few careful steps forward, Catherine spotted a row of high-end cars glinting under strategic spotlights, sleek BMW sedans, imposing Mercedes SUVs, and even a couple of gleaming Ferraris roped off for special display. On large video screens mounted along the walls, promotional clips played on loop, showcasing well-dressed individuals driving along winding coastal roads or through the sparkling city at night, smiling as if they had transcended the ordinary world. In one corner, a self-serve coffee bar offered cappuccinos and bottled water, an inviting sign that the dealership spared no expense in making potential buyers comfortable. Yet as before, Catherine didn't see any staff members approaching her. She couldn't decide if she preferred that or not. Did she want someone to come talk to her, or did she crave the solitude to inspect cars at her own pace? Possibly both, as her conflicting emotions tangled beneath a calm exterior. A short distance away stood a cluster of salespeople conversing in hushed tones. Standing out among them was Richard Warner, the manager who had brushed her off so condescendingly during her previous visit. Even in the few short days that had passed, she recognized the same practiced posture, chest slightly puffed, chin raised, a subtle air of someone who believed his time was too valuable for small talk. Next to him, two sales associates listened attentively, James Peterson, a trim man in a charcoal suit, and Sophia Williams, the only woman in their group, wearing a neatly tailored blazer and a polite smile. Richard's voice carried across the polished floor as he discussed product lines and sales targets. Catherine gathered that he was the man in charge, someone with the authority to shape both policy and atmosphere. Remembering how quickly he had abandoned her to chase after a suited executive, she felt a spark of resentment. Still, she tried to keep an open mind. She had come here for a car, not for a confrontation. Moments later, James stepped away from the group and walked toward one of the vehicles at the edge of the showroom, leaving Richard and Sophia to finish their conversation. That was when Richard's gaze swept across the dealership and landed on Catherine. He hesitated, as if trying to recall where he'd seen her before. She stood firm, returning his look but saying nothing. Eventually, recognition seemed to flicker across his features, his lips pressed into a tight smile. He said something to Sophia, then motioned for her to wait while he approached Catherine. "Miss," he said, sounding cordial but guarded, "welcome to Elite Motors. Can I help you find something specific today?" She took a controlled breath, determined not to let old frustrations surface immediately. "I'm interested in the Audi Q5, she replied simply. "I came in a few days ago, but I didn't get a chance to discuss it in detail." Richard nodded, his expression revealing a hint of confusion. Clearly, her face was familiar, though he might not yet recall their exact interaction. He glanced at her casual attire, but stopped short of making the same dismissive remark he'd given her last time. "Right, the Q5? Well, it's a fine vehicle. Can I get you something to drink first? Espresso, still, or sparkling water?" Catherine felt a slight relief that he was at least being polite. "No, thank you," she replied, glancing around. "I'd just like to speak with someone who can answer my questions about safety features and pricing options." Her words seemed to put him momentarily on the defensive. "I'd be glad to assist," he said, regaining his confident poise. "Though it might be best to have one of our specialists walk you through the details." He turned, beckoning Sophia. "Sophia, could you come over here, please?" Sophia joined them quickly, a courteous smile lighting her features. "Of course. I'll be happy to help," she said, meeting Catherine's gaze as if attempting to convey sincerity. As Catherine prepared to follow Sophia to the Q5 on display, she noticed Richard lingering behind, tapping his foot as though impatient. The manager's attitude, though outwardly polite, seemed more about completing a task than genuinely assisting a customer. Catherine resolved to remain watchful. This place offered every material comfort, yet she sensed a deeper, unspoken tension, one she suspected might reveal itself sooner rather than later. Sophia led Catherine to a sleek, obsidian-colored Audi Q5 parked beneath a spotlight that emphasized the car's refined silhouette. A placard on the windshield displayed its main selling points: Quattro all-wheel drive, advanced safety assists, and luxurious interior appointments. Catherine ran her hand lightly over the driver's side door, feeling the smooth finish. She genuinely liked the Q5's design, appreciating that it managed to be both sophisticated and understated. Sophia began her pitch with a touch of eagerness, listing safety features such as blind spot monitoring, lane departure warnings, and an advanced braking system. "It's one of our best-selling SUVs among customers who want both style and security," she explained. Her tone was professional but not pushy, which put Catherine somewhat at ease. She asked a few clarifying questions about performance and maintenance costs. Sophia answered thoroughly, and for a moment, Catherine felt hopeful that perhaps this dealership experience could be redeemed. Just as Catherine was considering requesting a test drive, Richard appeared from behind a glossy red BMW, his expression hinting at impatience. "Sophia," he said, interrupting the conversation, "you might need to assist our new client who just arrived. Mr. Winters is back." Then he gave Catherine a cursory glance. "I can handle the rest here." Catherine sensed the uneasy shift in Sophia's demeanor, The young woman looked torn, as if she didn't want to abandon Catherine for a second time, yet felt obliged to follow her manager's directive. "Actually, Richard," she ventured, "I was just about to show Ms. Harris the interior." Richard cut her off with an overly bright smile. "I'll take it from here. Mr. Winters is a priority client. Please see to him immediately." Sophia hesitated for a split second before nodding and walking away, though she cast Catherine a quick, apologetic glance. Catherine wanted to protest that she was perfectly happy talking to Sophia, but Richard had already stepped closer, adjusting the lapels of his tailored jacket. He cleared his throat. "So, Ms. Harris, you said you were interested in the Q5. May I ask what sort of budget you're working with?" The question landed like a heavy stone in her stomach. She could tell from the subtle lift of his eyebrow that he was testing her. "I'd rather focus on the features and final pricing once I've decided," she replied, doing her best to remain cordial. "And it's Catherine, by the way." Richard folded his arms, offering a small chuckle. "I see. Well, the Q5 is definitely a premium vehicle. We also have some certified pre-owned options that could be more manageable in price. Would you like to see those?" Catherine tightened her grip on her folder, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. She was aware that, in the eyes of someone like Richard, her casual attire might signify a modest budget. But his assumption that she couldn't afford the new model was laid bare. "I'm specifically interested in the new Q5, she asserted. "I'd like to see trim options, financing details, or even the cash price." Her directness appeared to catch him off guard, for he paused before responding. "Certainly," he said coolly. "I just want to make sure we're matching the right vehicle to the right client, Ms. Catherine." Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Benjamin Winters, the impeccably dressed executive from her last visit, conversing animatedly with Sophia near a glossy black Porsche. Richard's posture became noticeably stiffer, as though he resented having to stand with Catherine instead of swooping in on the obviously wealthy Mr. Winters. She realized that Richard measured each customer by their outward signs of affluence, prioritizing those who exuded wealth. He retrieved a tablet from his jacket pocket and began tapping through configurations for the Q5. "Base model starts around 50,000 euros, he said, tilting the screen toward her. "But with the premium package, you're looking closer to 60. Catherine nodded, crossing her arms. "And how soon could I test drive it?" Richard's eyes flickered toward Mr. Winters again. "There's a line of potential buyers waiting for test drives today. I can see if we can fit you in soon, but Mr. Winters also wants to test a few vehicles. I'll have to coordinate scheduling." She swallowed her rising irritation. Part of her wanted to announce that money was no object, that she could buy out the car with a single check. But a stronger part refused to validate his bias by showing off. She took a measured breath. "I'm sure you'll handle it fairly," she replied, voice steady. "I can wait." A derisive smile ghosted across his lips. "If you say so." He gestured vaguely toward a customer waiting area filled with plush leather chairs. "Feel free to make yourself comfortable. I'll come find you once we're ready." He turned on his heel to rejoin Sophia and Mr. Winters, leaving Catherine standing alone by the Q5. She stared at the car, questioning whether she even wanted it anymore. The blatant prejudice was exhausting, a reminder of everything she detested about superficial judgments. She felt as though she had unwittingly stepped into a stage play where wealth and appearances trumped basic respect. Glancing around, she saw other salespeople similarly focused on the suits, the designer handbags, the polished shoes. She forced herself to remain calm, reminding herself that she was here for a reason, to find a safe, reliable vehicle. Yet, in that moment, her sense of dignity felt frayed, as if tested by a man and a system too blinded by image to see her true worth. Catherine settled into one of the oversized leather chairs in the showroom's waiting area, the gleaming surface cold against her arms. Although the seat was comfortable, she felt a distinct awkwardness in being relegated to the sidelines while Richard lavished attention on a more promising customer. The lounge was decorated with large-format auto magazines, each cover featuring men and women in immaculate business attire standing next to cars that symbolized wealth and status. No matter how much she tried to maintain composure, Catherine couldn't ignore the sting of humiliation. She found herself mentally replaying Richard's subtle sneers and condescending questions, each one quietly insisting that someone dressed like her must not belong in this luxury world. Her mind drifted to the motto of her employer, Horizon Enterprises, people over profits. She wondered if Richard and his team had ever even considered a similar approach in their industry. Her phone vibrated, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down to see a text from Elena. "How's the car shopping? Any luck?" Catherine typed a quick reply. "At the dealership now. Let's just say, they're not giving me a warm welcome. We'll fill you in soon." As she hit send, she noticed Sophia approaching from across the showroom. The young saleswoman's expression conveyed both concern and regret. Sophia crouched down beside Catherine's chair, lowering her voice. "I'm really sorry about all this," she began, clearly referring to Richard's dismissive attitude. "He can be difficult. I can't promise to fix everything, but if you want, I can personally schedule a test drive for you later today or even tomorrow." Catherine offered a grateful, if tired, smile. "I appreciate that, Sophia, but I'm not sure I want to spend any more time here. This place clearly has its preferences." Sophia sighed. "I know. It's frustrating, especially for someone like me trying to build a reputation based on service, not stereotypes. Listen, if you decide to come back, here's my card." She handed Catherine a plain white business card with her name and cell number. "Call me directly, and I'll make sure you get an honest walkthrough." Before Catherine could reply, Richard's voice rose from near the Porsche. "Sophia, can we get some help over here?" His tone was sharp, the unspoken command obvious. Sophia squeezed Catherine's hand gently, then stood and strode away, her posture stiff with tension. Catherine watched her go, feeling a pang of empathy for the young woman. It wasn't just customers who suffered under that environment. It seemed, deciding she'd had enough, Catherine rose from the chair. She started toward the exit when she came face to face with James Peterson, the other salesman who had been hovering around Richard. He looked startled, as if he'd just emerged from a side office. "Oh, hi, I'm James," he said, extending a hand. "Are you leaving so soon?" She paused, shaken from her single-minded urge to escape. "I've been here for a while, actually. I think I'll come back another time. Or maybe not at all." He glanced over his shoulder to where Richard was laughing with Mr. Winters. Sighing, James lowered his voice. "Look, I understand. I see what goes on around here. It's not always fair. But if you do come back, I'd be happy to help you find something that meets your needs." Catherine wondered what angle James might be playing, but his eyes conveyed sincerity tinged with frustration. Perhaps an employee as trapped by the culture as Sophia seemed to be. Nodding politely, she murmured, "Thanks," then stepped around him, heading for the glass doors. The drizzle outside had intensified, the sky a dull grey that matched her mood. She rushed to her Honda, fumbling with her keys. Once inside, she let out a tremulous sigh. She had thought the second visit might provide a chance to see if her earlier experience was just a bad day. Instead, the prejudice she encountered felt even more glaring. Sitting there in the driver's seat, she weighed her options. She could buy a car elsewhere. There were plenty of dealerships in Seattle. Or she could simply choose another manufacturer that didn't make her feel like an intruder in someone else's exclusive club. Part of her, though, bristled at the idea of retreating with her tail between her legs. Wasn't she entitled to buy any car she wanted without having to prove herself worthy of it? Yet the notion of confronting Richard directly seemed distasteful. She loathed scenes and self-serving displays of wealth. Telling him who she was married to felt beneath her, like playing a game on his terms, but maybe some battles needed fighting. A small inner voice whispered. She couldn't be sure if it was stubborn pride or a moral stance on principle that fueled that thought. For now, she just needed to breathe. She pulled out of the parking lot, the wheels of her Civic splashing water onto the sleek Elite Motors sign as she turned onto the main road. The sting to her dignity still throbbed, but she resolved to let the humiliation settle before making any big decisions. Catherine arrived home, feeling an emotional heaviness that pressed on her chest. Drizzle had graduated into a steady downpour by the time she parked in front of the house. Eager to escape the storm, she hurried inside, damp hair clinging to her cheeks. The quiet warmth of her living room felt like a refuge, especially compared to the tense, judgmental air at Elite Motors. She tossed her jacket onto a nearby chair and headed upstairs to her small, cherished library, her personal sanctuary. The room was little more than a converted spare bedroom lined with bookshelves. Faded photographs adorned one shelf. Pictures from her college days, snapshots of travels with Michael, even a candid moment of her father grinning beside a restored car engine. She paused to run a finger across the frame that held her favorite photo of her parents, Patricia and Robert Thompson, dancing at some long-ago anniversary. The memory softened her mood. Sinking into a worn armchair, Catherine let herself revisit the day she first met Michael. She'd been a sophomore at the University of Washington, nursing a strong latte at a cramped campus cafe. Michael, then a 26-year-old grad student dabbling in startup ideas, had sat at the table next to hers. She recalled how she initially mistook his understated hoodie and earnest demeanor as signs of an ordinary student scraping by on financial aid, just like her. It was only months later that she discovered he came from a wealthy family. By then, they had bonded over a mutual love of volunteer work and a shared belief in giving back. Their connection had grown organically, untainted by preconceptions about each other's wealth or lack thereof. Pulling out her phone, she noticed a missed message from Sophia. "I'm sorry about what happened today. If you have any further questions about the Q5 or anything else, call me any time." Catherine typed a quick reply. "Thank you, Sophia. I appreciate your help." She didn't elaborate further. The last thing she wanted was to draw Sophia into a conflict with her own manager. A second message flashed from her brother. "David, need to talk." Something came up. She tapped a response that she'd call him soon. Something told her it might be another request for financial help, and she didn't feel ready to handle that conversation just yet. In her unsettled state, any talk of money felt more draining than usual. About an hour later, the sound of the front door opening and closing signaled Michael's return. She heard him call her name softly. "I'm up here," she answered. Moments later, he appeared in the doorway, setting aside his briefcase. His eyebrows knit in concern when he saw her curled up, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Hey," he said quietly, stepping into the room. "Rough day," Catherine exhaled, letting the tension in her shoulders ease. "You could say that." "I decided to give Elite Motors another chance on my lunch break. Didn't go well." Michael frowned, slipping his hands into his pockets. "What happened?" She recounted the day's events, the condescending tones, the blatant catering to wealthier clientele, and the growing sense that her appearance automatically disqualified her from respectful treatment. As she spoke, anger and embarrassment warred within her. She feared coming across as whiny or petty, Yet Michael listened without interruption, occasionally giving a sympathetic nod. When she finished, he said softly, "I'm so sorry, Kath. You deserve better. And I hate that you had to deal with that alone." She took a long breath, remembering her vow not to rely on his status as a shield. "I know you'd have gone with me, or let Thomas drive me," she said. "I just didn't want to walk in there waving around the Harris name like a magic wand. It's not who I am." "I understand," he replied, stepping closer to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "But you're also not someone who should be dismissed so easily. I've seen you stand up for fairness 100 times over the years. Why didn't you call them out?" Catherine managed a weak smile. "Because it felt pointless. People like Richard will only see dollar signs or the lack thereof. Me telling him, 'Do you know who I'm married to?' would only confirm his worldview that money is all that matters." Michael took a seat in the armchair across from her, eyebrows set in determination. "Then let's do it differently. If you don't want to throw my name around, maybe we can do something to ensure you get treated with the respect you deserve. I'm not talking about a grand spectacle, but at least an equal footing." She stared at him for a moment, memories of their earliest days flooding back, when they both believed in kindness above pomp, substance over surface. "What do you have in mind?" she asked quietly. He shrugged, but his eyes shone with resolve. "Let's talk it through over dinner. We'll figure out a way to approach this that stays true to who you are." Nodding, Catherine stood, feeling a measure of gratitude for his unassuming but unwavering support. She followed him downstairs, where he pulled takeout menus from a kitchen drawer. As they debated Thai versus Italian, she realized how comforting it was to have a partner who didn't see her dilemma as trivial. In that moment, her sanctuary expanded beyond just a cozy room of books. Michael was part of it too, anchoring her sense of self when the world around them seemed to value everything else more. By the time the takeout arrived, Catherine had changed into a pair of comfortable leggings and a loose sweater. She and Michael settled around their dining table, cartons of spicy noodles and stir-fried vegetables spread between them. The mouth-watering aroma laced the air, but Catherine found her appetite overshadowed by the day's events. Still, she managed a few bites, letting the mix of chili and lemongrass distract her momentarily. Eventually, Michael set down his fork and gently touched her hand. "Tell me more," he urged, voice soft. "What did you feel when you were there, dealing with this Richard guy again?" Catherine gazed at their wedding photo on the wall, a simple image capturing the two of them laughing mid-ceremony. "I felt belittled," she admitted. "Like the moment he saw my jeans and sneakers, he decided I wasn't worth his time. It reminded me of those times growing up when my parents were judged by how they dressed or what car they drove." "I can't stand that kind of snobbery," Michael nodded, empathy etched on his face. "It's awful. You've always been about substance, and I love that about you." He paused, as though weighing his next words carefully. "Still, is there a chance you're holding yourself back from enjoying what you've earned simply because you're afraid it'll change who you are?" The question struck Catherine like a chord vibrating in her chest. She wasn't sure how to answer. "I don't know. Maybe, but it's more about not wanting to become someone who flaunts wealth or thinks expensive things make them superior." "And you won't," Michael reassured. "Nothing could make you that shallow." He hesitated, then leaned forward. "We could go back to the dealership together, not to flaunt anything, but to ensure you're treated like a real customer. If that's the car you want, the Q5, let's get you the respect and service you deserve." An internal battle played out in Catherine's mind. On one side, the desire to maintain her independence and avoid spectacle. On the other, a justified anger at having been so blatantly dismissed. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay, let's do it, but promise me, no grand announcements about your position or the money. I just want a fair shot." Michael grinned, relief evident. Deal. They continued eating in a more relaxed silence, exchanging glances that communicated understanding. After dinner, while Catherine cleared the plates, Michael retrieved his phone and walked into his study to handle a work call. She could overhear snippets of his conversation with Thomas, something about scheduling a car pickup. Curiosity piqued, but she decided to wait for him to volunteer the information. Later, while they were loading the dishwasher, Michael explained, "I asked Thomas to bring the Bugatti around tomorrow morning." He paused, noticing her immediate look of surprise. "I know it's extravagant, but hear me out. We almost never use it. It was a gift from a former client who insisted on thanking me with something outrageous. If anything, it makes a statement without us having to say a word." Catherine pressed her lips into a tight line. The Bugatti La Voiture Noire was legendary, one of the most exclusive cars in the world. She remembered how she and Michael had joked that it felt like owning a piece of art rather than a practical vehicle. "You want to drive that to Elite Motors?" she asked, trying to keep any trace of derision out of her voice. "It's not about bragging," Michael explained gently. "Think of it this way. We show up looking exactly like ourselves, nothing fancy. But we step out of this ridiculously rare car. It'll make them pause and realize they shouldn't judge customers by appearance alone." Catherine exhaled, leaning against the kitchen counter. She understood the logic, even if a part of her cringed at the ostentation. It might be the silent lesson Richard needed, especially if he'd only cater to those who looked the part. "All right," she relented softly. "If you think this is the best way, I'll trust you." Michael's eyes lit up with appreciation, and he tugged her into a gentle embrace. "We'll handle it together, and we won't make a scene. We'll just be us." That night, sleep came fitfully for Catherine. She wrestled with the memories of her father's frugal but honest lifestyle, her mother's gentle teachings on humility, and her own fierce commitment to treating everyone equally. She worried that showing up in a car worth millions would brand her as the very kind of person she despised, someone whose worth was tied to a bank balance. Yet she also felt a simmering sense of justice. If Elite Motors and its staff judged customers solely by outward signs of wealth, then maybe it was time for them to see that their biases could cost them more than a mere sale. Before drifting off, she recalled the fleeting looks of empathy from Sophia and James. Not everyone at that dealership was blind to fairness, she told herself. Perhaps, in some small way, she and Michael could be catalysts for better treatment of every customer, regardless of attire or background. With that thought, Catherine finally found a sliver of calm, letting her eyes close as the patter of rain offered a lullaby that Seattle knew by heart. Morning arrived with a light drizzle and a pale grey sky. Catherine stood in front of her closet, deliberating over what to wear. She wanted to remain true to herself, no flamboyant designer labels, no expensive jewelry. After a moment's hesitation, she chose her usual attire: well-fitted jeans, a soft cashmere sweater in a muted navy hue, and a pair of sturdy yet stylish leather boots. Minimal, comfortable, and unmistakably hers. Downstairs, the aroma of coffee greeted her as Michael placed 2 mugs on the kitchen island. "I was just about to come get you," he said, handing her one. "Thomas called. He's outside with the Bugatti." She sipped the warm drink and took a steadying breath. "So, we're really doing this?" Michael nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "We are, but remember, no big display. We'll let the car speak for itself, and if Richard still doesn't get it, well, that's on him." They gathered their things, stepping out into the light rain. The sight of the Bugatti La Voiture Noire in their driveway was striking. Glossy black paint, elegant lines, and an almost sculptural design that exuded exclusivity. Thomas, ever unassuming, stood by the driver's door, holding an umbrella. "Good morning, Mr. Harris, Mrs. Harris," he greeted. "Are we ready?" Catherine couldn't help but feel a jolt of nerves. "Ready as I'll ever be," she replied, sliding into the passenger seat after Michael. Thomas took the wheel, maneuvering the car as if it were a precious artifact, one that commanded both awe and caution. The drive to Elite Motors seemed surreal. Seattle's streets buzzed with everyday traffic, yet heads turned wherever they went. Pedestrians squinted through the rain to catch a glimpse of the rare machine, and even drivers rolled down their windows for a better look. Catherine found herself wishing she could disappear, but she also recognized the power of this display. If the dealership staff had decided she wasn't luxury enough, the Bugatti would challenge that assumption without her uttering a single boast. When they pulled up to the dealership's grand entrance, it was as though someone had pressed pause on the entire scene. The salespeople inside stopped mid-conversation, gazing out through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Other customers craned their necks to see who would emerge from such an extraordinary vehicle. Catherine swallowed, mentally steeling herself. She hadn't asked for fanfare, but there it was. Thomas exited first, opening the passenger door for Catherine and offering her an umbrella. She took it with a polite smile, stepping onto the wet asphalt. Michael followed, rounding the car to stand beside her. They both wore their usual attire, the stark contrast between their unassuming clothes and the ostentatious car creating a visual dissonance. Inside, the dealership buzzed with subdued excitement. People whispered and pointed, a few even trying to snap covert photos on their phones. Richard Warner, wearing a dark suit and that calculated smile, came rushing forward. "Welcome to Elite Motors," he said, voice charged with enthusiasm. "I'm the manager here. Let me—" His words cut short when he finally recognized Catherine, the same woman he had dismissed twice in the previous days. His eyes darted from her face to Michael, then back to the Bugatti parked outside. The color drained from his cheeks, replaced by a nervous flush. "Oh, Ms. Harris, I didn't realize that you—" he began, fumbling for composure. Michael offered a cordial nod, raising a hand to indicate there was no need for theatrics. "We're here to see a specific car, the Audi Q5 my wife has been considering." He kept his tone friendly yet firm. Catherine watched as Richard's facade cracked. This was a man used to reading clients at a glance, summing them up by brand names on suits and accessories. Now he found his assumptions turned upside down. "Yes, of course," he stammered. "I'll have someone bring it around immediately. Or would you like to take a seat in our VIP lounge?" Her pulse thudded in her ears, but Catherine forced a calm smile. "That won't be necessary," she said. "I'd prefer to just look at the car right now." Richard's nod was overly eager. "Certainly, right away." He gestured toward James and Sophia, who stood a few feet away, eyes wide at the scene unfolding. "James, Sophia, let's show Mr. and Mrs. Harris the Q5. As they walked deeper into the showroom, Michael gently placed a hand at the small of Catherine's back in a gesture of solidarity. Neither of them needed to gloat or draw attention to their wealth. The car had done that for them. Catherine felt a swirl of emotions, a sense of validation that she deserved respectful treatment, mixed with a lingering discomfort at using such a display to achieve it. Still, she reminded herself that the real goal was to get the safe, reliable SUV she wanted, free from unfair judgments. If this was the strategy that would make Richard see her as a legitimate customer, so be it. She shot Michael a small, grateful smile, knowing that despite her reservations, his support in this odd plan meant the world. Saturday morning arrived with a gentle hush over Seattle, the sky a muted canvas of grey clouds that hinted at rain. Catherine awoke to a knot of nerves in her stomach, a feeling that only intensified when she remembered what she and Michael had planned. Lying in bed, she took a moment to steady her thoughts, listening to the faint patter of raindrops against the window. She knew this day would challenge her core beliefs about humility and how appearances could shape perception. She rose and headed to the bathroom, washing her face with cold water as if to awaken her resolve. In the bedroom, she stared at her closet, deliberating on what to wear. Normally, a casual weekend called for jeans and a comfortable sweater, an outfit that reflected who she was. Yet a nagging voice wondered if she should dress up, just slightly, to avoid a repeat of the condescension she'd experienced at Elite Motors. After an internal tug-of-war, she decided to stick with her usual style: dark denim, a soft grey sweater, and ankle boots. If this dealership insisted on judging her by a superficial standard, then so be it. She refused to compromise her sense of self. Downstairs, she found Michael in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone while sipping from a ceramic mug. He glanced up with a warm smile. "Morning," he said, sliding a steaming cup of coffee her way. Thomas texted, "He's already prepped the Bugatti." Her stomach fluttered when she heard the name of that rare, eye-catching vehicle. It wasn't a car she or Michael regularly drove, more of a symbolic curiosity gifted by a grateful tech mogul. But Michael's plan to use the Bugatti as a silent statement had crystallized the night before. Catherine had gone to sleep wrestling with doubts, yet she woke determined to see it through. Taking a small sip of coffee, she asked, "You still think this is the best approach?" Her voice held a trace of uncertainty. Michael set down his mug and moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're not doing this to flaunt anything, Kath. We're doing it to ensure you get treated with basic respect. If pulling up in a rare car is what it takes to make someone like Richard pause and reconsider his biases, then that's what we'll do." She offered a slight nod, pushing aside a lingering pang of discomfort. Deep down, she understood. She had spent her life refusing to let wealth define her, yet in a world so often fixated on status, sometimes a stark demonstration was the only way to reveal a flawed system. Still, she felt a twinge of guilt at using such an ostentatious symbol, an internal contradiction she might never fully resolve. Before they left, Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Saw an article on Richard Warner. Apparently he's sales manager of the quarter. Good luck today." Catherine exhaled, remembering the smug grin Richard wore whenever he touted his sales accomplishments. A renewed determination swept through her. If anyone needed a reminder that customers came in all guises, it was Richard Warner. They stepped outside to find Thomas, ever punctual, standing by the sleek, obsidian black Bugatti. Even under the overcast sky, the car glistened like a polished gemstone. Its aerodynamic curves seemed almost out of place in the quaint suburban driveway. Thomas tipped his head in greeting. "Morning, Mrs. Harris, Mr. Harris. Everything's ready." Michael opened the passenger door for Catherine. She paused, taking in the sight. A wave of self-consciousness washed over her as she imagined how people might stare once they reached Elite Motors. But she swallowed that unease, reminding herself that her goal was justice, not vanity. Settling into the plush seat, she glanced around the car's interior. It was all leather, carbon fiber, and elegant controls, an engineering marvel that felt more like a spaceship than an automobile. Michael eased in beside her, closing the door softly. Thomas started the engine, and a quiet, powerful hum filled the air. Catherine felt her pulse quicken. She'd faced many challenges in her life, juggling financial stresses in college, learning to navigate the world of a wealthy family through marriage, and proving her worth in a corporate environment. But something about this endeavor, this subtle, silent protest, made her heart race. Perhaps because it spoke to a deeper battle, the one between her firm beliefs in humility and the harsh truth that the world often respected only outward success. As the Bugatti rolled away from the curb, she reached for Michael's hand, clasping it tightly. He squeezed back, a gesture of steady support. Peering through the tinted windows, Catherine watched the familiar streets pass by, each turn bringing her closer to a confrontation she both dreaded and anticipated. The drizzle had intensified, streaking across the windshield, but she found a small comfort in Seattle's perpetual rain, constant, unpretentious, and yet powerful in its own way. The Bugatti glided through Seattle's busy streets, collecting stares and murmurs wherever it went. Even in a city accustomed to luxury cars, thanks to the tech boom, this particular machine turned heads with its rarity and price tag. Catherine felt her cheeks warm each time she glimpsed someone gawking. She tried to focus instead on the soft chatter between Michael and Thomas as they navigated toward Elite Motors. When they finally arrived, the dealership's glass facade reflected the sky's dull gray. Thomas slowed the car, bringing it to a smooth stop in front of the double doors, where customers usually dropped off their vehicles for service. Beyond the windows, Catherine could see staff members and prospective buyers curiously peering out, some even pausing mid-step to get a better look. Michael opened his door first, stepping out into the drizzle. He wore jeans and a plain navy jacket, exuding confidence without the trappings of a high-powered investor. Catherine followed, her leather boots tapping gently against the wet asphalt. Immediately, she noticed Richard Warner near the entrance, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to visible astonishment. Time seemed to slow as Richard's eyes flicked between the Bugatti and the couple who emerged from it. Several seconds passed before he managed to plaster on a bright smile. The fact that Catherine had visited twice before, wearing the same understated style, now collided dramatically with the scene unfolding before him. She picked up a subtle change in his demeanor, a crack in the polished veneer of a man who prided himself on reading clients at a glance. "Well, welcome back," Richard said, stepping forward and extending his hand to Michael first, then to Catherine. His voice had a forced warmth, the kind that concealed embarrassment. "It's good to see you again." Michael responded with an easy nod. "We're here about that Audi Q5 my wife's been considering," he stated, calmly ignoring Richard's fawning tone. Catherine glanced around and noticed that Sophia and James stood a few feet away, both looking relieved to see her. Other staff members, who had ignored her just days before, now seemed poised to offer assistance. The entire showroom buzzed with anticipation, as if everyone sensed that this visit would be different. Richard's composure wavered. "Yes, of course," he replied hastily. "Right this way. I'll make sure you get the best service." He gestured for them to enter, using grandiose sweeps of his arm, like a host welcoming VIP guests. Inside, the dealership's usual atmosphere of low-key luxury now felt electric. A trio of customers waiting at the reception area craned their necks toward the new arrivals. Catherine could guess what was running through their minds. Who are these people, stepping out of such a car, but dressed so casually? Still slightly uncomfortable with the attention, Catherine lifted her chin and walked in at Michael's side. She was determined not to lose herself in the spectacle. Her plan was straightforward: test drive the Q5, get the final pricing, and make the purchase if everything aligned. She didn't need an entourage or lavish compliments. Sophia approached them, a genuine smile lighting her features. "I've got the Q5 waiting for you, Miss Harris," she said, her tone calm but enthusiastic. "I made sure it's fueled up and ready for a test drive as soon as you'd like." Michael offered Sophia a polite greeting, while Catherine's shoulders relaxed. She appreciated the young saleswoman's sincerity. "Thank you," Catherine replied. "I'd love to see it now, if that's possible." Richard, not one to be sidelined, stepped forward briskly. "I'd be more than happy to join, but if you'd prefer a moment alone with Sophia to look over the car, I'll respect that," he said, carefully measured. Catherine sensed he was trying to portray himself as understanding and flexible, a stark contrast to the dismissive man she had dealt with before. Glancing at Michael, she quietly asked, "Want to come with me?" He squeezed her hand. "It's your call, Kath. I'll join if you'd like, or I can let you have time with Sophia." She considered for a moment. The main point of bringing Michael along, aside from moral support, was to ensure she wasn't brushed off. But with the entire staff now wide-eyed and attentive, there was little risk of that. "I'll go with Sophia," she decided. "You can check out the financing options or just wait here." Richard gestured eagerly to the plush waiting area. "Please, make yourself comfortable, Mr. Harris. Let me fetch some of our premium coffee or bottled water if you prefer." Michael gave him a polite but measured nod. "Thank you," he said, before turning to Catherine. "Have fun out there." She followed Sophia outside to where the Audi Q5 was parked, neatly angled under a small overhang to shield it from the rain. Sophia grabbed the keys and opened the driver's door for Catherine, who slid into the seat. The interior's warmth and faint smell of new leather greeted her, a stark contrast to the tension that had dominated her previous visits. Yet this time, Catherine felt a sense of calm determination. She placed her hands on the wheel, ready to begin the test drive. No matter how this day ended, she had already made a statement about who she was, and, perhaps more importantly, who she refused to be. Catherine gently guided the Audi Q5 onto the wet streets, Sophia in the passenger seat, offering directions and insights about the SUV's handling. After days of frustration, Catherine found the act of driving both liberating and strangely reassuring. The engine purred smoothly beneath her touch, and she quickly understood why so many drivers praised this particular model. It felt sturdy, yet agile, powerful, yet quiet, a balance she found appealing. During the test drive, Sophia highlighted the Q5's features without resorting to sales jargon. She explained how the all-wheel drive adapted to the slippery road, emphasizing safety, a topic close to Catherine's heart. "It's got forward collision warning and emergency braking," Sophia added, glancing over. "In Seattle's stop-and-go traffic, that can be a real lifesaver." Catherine nodded appreciatively. "I can see why so many people like it. It's comfortable, but not over the top." They circled back toward Elite Motors, the wipers swishing rhythmically against the drizzle. Catherine found herself enjoying Sophia's company. The younger woman struck a balance between professional and personable, something Catherine admired. "I have to say," Catherine ventured, careful with her tone, "you've been the only person here who's consistently treated me with kindness." Sophia lowered her gaze for a moment, then looked back up. "I'm just sorry the rest of your experience wasn't the same," she said softly. "Richard runs a tight ship, but sometimes in this business, there's an unfortunate focus on who looks wealthy enough to warrant top-tier service. I don't agree with it." Turning into the dealership parking lot, Catherine parked near the entrance, where Michael and Richard stood talking in what looked like a polite but guarded conversation. As the SUV's engine idled, Sophia added, "I hope, regardless of your purchase, you'll know I truly value your time." Catherine gave her a reassuring smile. "I do. Thank you." They exited the vehicle, bracing themselves against the rain for a few steps before stepping into the relative warmth of the showroom. Richard turned toward them, an expectant gleam in his eye, as if anticipating the final outcome. "How was the drive?" he asked, his voice steady but betraying a hint of anxiousness. Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but Catherine spoke first. "It was great. Exactly what I'm looking for in terms of comfort and safety." Richard's smile widened. "That's wonderful news. If you're ready, we can talk about financing, or if you'd prefer to purchase outright, we can discuss that as well." He cast a careful glance at Michael, clearly hoping for a display of financial might. But Michael simply nodded, offering no immediate details. From the corner of her eye, Catherine spotted James hovering near a desk, pretending to straighten brochures. The tension in the air was palpable, as though each staff member braced for the next turn in this encounter. Richard gestured toward a private office, inviting Catherine and Michael to join him. Sophia and James remained behind, exchanging a brief look that Catherine caught just before the door shut. Inside the office, a large window overlooked the showroom floor, providing a vantage point where Catherine could see employees bustling about. She settled into a leather chair beside Michael, while Richard took his place behind a sleek wooden desk. The manager cleared his throat, tapping on a tablet that displayed a digital contract and pricing details. "We have a few Q5 trims, each with varied features," he explained, sliding the device toward them. Catherine leaned forward, scanning the numbers. They aligned with what she had researched, and though pricey, it wasn't beyond her reach, or Michael's. Richard seemed to sense her hesitation, but not the reason behind it. She was pausing to reflect on the stark shift in attitude she had witnessed. Days ago, he had barely offered her a polite greeting. Now, he was showing an almost desperate eagerness to close the deal. Michael broke the silence. "Catherine, if this is the car you want, we'll finalize it. But let me ask, is there anything else you'd like to see or compare first?" She exhaled, recalling the humiliations that brought her here. She disliked confrontation, but she realized that standing up for herself demanded more than a quiet purchase. Her voice calm, she turned to Richard. "I'm curious. Why was I steered toward pre-owned models earlier, when I first came in? I specifically asked about the Q5, yet I was discouraged from looking at it. Did you assume I couldn't afford it?" A flicker of discomfort passed across Richard's face. He glanced at Michael, then back at Catherine. I'm sorry if that was your impression," he stammered, forcing a smile. "We try to match customers with the best fit. Budget is usually a concern." Michael leaned in, his voice gentle but firm. "It may surprise you, but Catherine makes her own money. She was fully prepared to buy a car without my involvement." He paused. "Frankly, it's disappointing how she was treated." Richard's cheeks flushed. He seemed torn between pride and the realization that his prejudices had been laid bare. "I apologize if my approach came off poorly," he offered, his words deliberately measured. Catherine let the statement linger without immediately accepting it. She wanted him to understand that a half-hearted apology wasn't enough to erase the indignity, and in the silence that followed, she sensed a small shift in the air, an acknowledgement that their presence today served as more than a simple business transaction. Michael rested his hand on Catherine's arm, as if to give her the option to continue or pivot away from the conversation. She inhaled slowly, deciding this was a moment to assert not just her purchasing power, but her personhood. "I accept your apology," she told Richard quietly, maintaining eye contact. "But I think it's important for you to realize that dismissing customers based on how they look or what they're wearing undermines any claim you have to providing excellent service." She noticed Richard swallow hard. His stance softened by a fraction, though tension still radiated from the tight lines of his jaw. "I understand," he replied, voice subdued. "We're committed to improving our customer experience." The phrase sounded rehearsed, yet perhaps this confrontation would spark a genuine shift in his approach. Her piece said, Catherine turned to Michael with a nod. "I do want this car. Let's finalize it with Sophia. She's the person who treated me fairly from the start." A flash of panic crossed Richard's face, but he quickly smoothed it away. He pressed a button on his desk phone, calling for Sophia. Moments later, the door opened, and she stepped in, though she looked a bit uncertain. "You needed me, Mr. Warner." Catherine offered her a warm smile. "Yes, Sophia. I'd like you to handle the paperwork for the Q5, if that's all right. Relief and gratitude lit Sophia's expression. Of course, I'll prepare everything and go over the details with you, she said, clasping her hands together as if to contain her excitement. We can do it at my desk. Richard rose from his chair, gesturing politely for them to follow Sophia out. By all means, he said, trying to maintain a professional facade. Let me know if you need anything else. They exited the office, leaving Richard behind. Catherine noticed James observing the group from across the showroom, an unreadable expression on his face. Once, at Sophia's desk, Catherine settled into a chair, grateful for the sense of calm that enveloped her. The hum of business resumed around them, though she could still feel curious glances in their direction. Sophia began explaining each line of the contract, from the total purchase price to the scheduled maintenance plan. Catherine nodded along, occasionally checking with Michael, who stayed respectfully silent unless she asked his opinion. Outside the large windows, the Bugatti remained parked in plain sight, a silent testament to the assumptions that had been shattered in the past half hour. At one point, Michael excused himself to discuss financing options with the dealership's finance manager. Catherine knew he had the resources to pay outright, but she also recognized that sometimes it made more sense to explore favorable interest rates. Still, the choice was hers. Michael was merely facilitating, not dictating. That balanced approach was one of the qualities she most admired about him. Left alone with Sophia, Catherine felt a flash of curiosity about how the young saleswoman endured an environment like Elite Motors. It can't be easy here, she ventured, signing one of the forms with a flourish of her pen. You seem like someone who genuinely cares about people. Sophia offered a shy smile. I do care. I've always believed in treating every customer with respect. Honestly, I've thought about leaving a few times, especially after seeing clients brushed off like you were. Her voice trembled slightly, as if revealing more than she intended. But good sales jobs are hard to come by, and well, I'm hoping to grow here. Catherine nodded, a pang of empathy tugging at her. She remembered her own journey climbing the ranks of HR consulting, facing subtle biases and challenges. Keep doing what you're doing, she said softly, pushing the signed documents back across the desk. It's what makes people remember you in a positive light. Sophia's smile widened. Thank you. That means a lot. A short while later, Michael returned, a folder in hand. All set, he announced, placing the paperwork on Sophia's desk. Just need your signature in a couple more places. Kath. She signed each remaining form, heart lightening with each stroke of her pen. Purchasing a car ought to have been straightforward, yet it had become a lesson in pride, dignity, and standing one's ground. She recognized that in confronting prejudice, she had also confronted parts of herself, her reluctance to use privilege and the fear of being misunderstood. They finished the formalities, and Sophia shook Catherine's hand warmly. Your new Audi will be detailed and ready soon. We can have it delivered, or you can drive it off the lot yourself once it's done. Catherine glanced at Michael, who wore a contented smile. I'll come pick it up personally, she replied, deciding that claiming the car in person would be one last step in taking ownership of the experience, too. Thank you again, Sophia. Her eyes flicked around the showroom. She spotted Richard watching from a distance, his posture rigid, as if struggling to reconcile the day's events. Though no dramatic confrontation had erupted, a quieter reckoning had taken place, one that Catherine hoped might spur deeper changes for customers who followed. Not long afterward, Catherine and Michael stood by the Bugatti, preparing to leave. Thomas had pulled the car around again, and the drizzle had turned into a misty haze that softened the dealership's modern lines. Looking at the sleek black vehicle, Catherine felt a mingled sense of relief and uncertainty about what they had just done. In many ways, they had accomplished their goal, She'd purchased her Q5 without letting Richard's biases dictate her decision. Yet she couldn't shake the lingering questions about privilege and her own values. "Ready to go?" Michael asked gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. She nodded, still absorbing the swirl of emotions. He signaled for Thomas to open the passenger door, and they both slid into the car's luxurious interior. The hum of the engine was powerful, yet oddly comforting. They pulled away from Elite Motors, leaving behind the glances of onlookers. Catherine watched the showroom shrink in the side mirror, reflecting on how different this outcome might have been had she come alone once more, or in her old Civic. The thought unsettled her, a reminder of how easily appearances could shift power dynamics. About halfway home, Catherine asked Thomas to make a detour to a scenic overlook near Lake Washington. It was a spot she and Michael often visited to think and talk in quieter moments. The grey clouds hung low, but the view remained impressive, water shimmering under the dull light, evergreen trees lining the shore. They got out of the car, stepping carefully onto the damp grass. Michael took her hand and led her toward a simple wooden bench beneath a leaning cedar tree. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. For a few minutes, they just sat there, neither speaking. Catherine finally broke the silence, her voice hushed. "Do you ever feel guilty about, I don't know, using money to solve problems?" He turned to look at her, his eyes sincere. "I've wrestled with that for years," he admitted. "My parents had a lot, and I saw how money could isolate us from real-world struggles. I don't think wealth is inherently bad, but it comes with responsibility. I try to invest in startups that have social impact or fund scholarships so that kids from low-income backgrounds can chase their dreams." She nodded, absorbing his words. "I appreciate that," she said quietly, "and I know you've never tried to force luxury on me. It's just today's experience made me realize how powerful a statement wealth can be, sometimes for good, sometimes for intimidation." Michael exhaled, gaze traveling across the lake's rippling surface. "The difference, Kathy, is in how we choose to use it," he said. "Bringing the Bugatti wasn't about gloating, it was about making someone see that they misjudged you, and I think we accomplished that." Her lips curved into a half-smile. "I guess we did." A sudden wave of emotion welled up, and she swallowed hard. "Part of me feels vindicated. Another part wonders if I sold out, letting a flashy car speak for me." "You didn't sell out," Michael replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You walked in there as you always do, your authentic self. The car was just the opener. The real statement came from your insistence on being treated with dignity." She leaned into him, allowing the reassuring warmth of his embrace. "Thank you," she murmured, "for not taking over or turning it into some big show. It meant a lot that you let me handle it in my own way." He pressed a light kiss to her temple. "I trust you to know what's right for you." Behind them, Thomas remained by the Bugatti, giving them privacy. Catherine felt a renewed appreciation for the subtle ways both Michael and Thomas balanced support with respect for her autonomy. She realized that her new Audi wasn't merely a car, it symbolized a stand she had taken. While she still believed in humility, she also recognized that there were moments to confront inequality head-on, particularly when it arose from prejudice. After a while, Michael glanced at his watch. "We should probably head back," he suggested gently, standing and offering her a hand. "It's getting chilly out here." She rose, letting him guide her across the damp grass. With the lake behind them and the drizzle continuing in a soft patter, Catherine felt lighter than she had in days. They settled back into the Bugatti, closing the doors on the cool, misty air. As Thomas steered toward home, Catherine gazed at the passing scenery, her thoughts quieter now. She had walked a fine line between pride and principle, between using privilege and staying grounded. The memory of Richard's forced smile and Sophia's genuine gratitude lingered in her mind, echoing the complexities of a world where judgment so often hinged on outward trappings. Still, she felt a sense of resolve. She would integrate this experience into her life's broader mission, advocating fairness, championing respect, and continually questioning the silent biases that lurked beneath everyday interactions. Monday morning arrived under the gentle glow of a late spring sun that pierced through Seattle's usual veil of clouds. Catherine stepped out of her house, feeling a strange combination of nerves and excitement. The previous Saturday's events at Elite Motors had left her both drained and invigorated. She had finally purchased her new Audi Q5, yet the experience remained more than a simple transaction. It hovered in her mind like a turning point, a reminder that her voice carried weight beyond her usual modest demeanor. She drove the Q5 to Horizon Enterprises for the first time, pulling into the parking lot with her heart pounding. Though her old Honda Civic had been a conversation piece, she was fairly certain the new Audi would prompt even more chatter. Sure enough, she felt a twinge of self-consciousness as she stepped out of the sleek SUV. Several co-workers meandered past, some casting quick, curious glances at the glossy vehicle. She offered them polite nods, trying not to read too much into their reactions. Inside the elevator, Catherine took a steadying breath, reminding herself of the day's to-do list. Wrap up open HR cases, prepare an upcoming training session on workplace bias, and meet with her boss, Jonathan Parker. She was determined to channel the lessons from Elite Motors into her professional life. If one car-buying incident could highlight how easily biases shaped interactions, then perhaps her team's HR work could broaden that realization across entire companies. As she reached her office floor, Elena Martinez was waiting by the reception area with 2 cups of coffee. "Morning," Elena said brightly, extending one of the cups. "Figured you could use this." Catherine offered her a warm smile. "You're a lifesaver, thank you." She sipped the coffee, grateful for its comforting heat. "I saw your text over the weekend. I'll fill you in on the car stuff later." They retreated to Catherine's office, a small space with a desk, bookshelves, and a large window overlooking the city. Elena perched on a chair, crossing her legs. "So, how's the new ride?" Catherine set her coffee down, recalling the swirl of emotions that had accompanied the purchase. "It's wonderful. Drives smoothly, has all the safety features I wanted. But it was a complicated process. The dealership. Let's just say it tested my patience." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Why am I not surprised? Those places can be insufferable with their assumptions." She leaned in, curiosity evident. "What happened?" Catherine recounted the experience, Richard's dismissive behavior, her decision to bring Michael and the Bugatti, and how she insisted on finalizing the purchase with Sophia. Throughout the story, Eleanor's expression shifted from disbelief to amusement, then to admiration. "Good for you," she said, once Catherine finished. "It's not easy confronting that kind of bias." "I know." Catherine wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling the warmth soak into her palms. "But it got me thinking. If it's this bad in a showroom, imagine how often people face similar prejudices in the workplace, especially if they don't have any sort of leverage." Elena nodded slowly. "You're talking about subtle discrimination, right? Like judging someone's competence based on how they're dressed, or whether they speak with an accent, or come from a certain background?" "Exactly," Catherine replied, her voice resolute. "And it occurred to me that we could expand our HR training to address unconscious bias more deeply, especially for businesses that engage heavily with the public. I just need to figure out how to propose it to Jonathan." A sudden ping from Catherine's phone drew her attention. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number with a short message. "This is James Peterson from Elite Motors. Could we meet?" Catherine's eyebrows shot up. She showed Elena the text. James is one of the salespeople there, not the manager. I wonder what he wants. Elena glanced at the screen, intrigued. Maybe he's following up to apologize or something. Possibly, Catherine murmured. She quickly typed back a polite reply. Hello, James. Is everything okay? Moments later, her phone buzzed again. I'd rather talk in person, free for coffee this afternoon. Catherine bit her lip in consideration. The request felt unusual. Why would a salesperson want a personal meeting after the sale was already done? Yet her curiosity was piqued, and a small part of her wanted to know more about the inner workings of that dealership. I'll meet with him, she decided, looking at Eleanor. It could be nothing, but maybe something's up. That's your call, Elena said with a shrug. Just be careful, and let me know what happens. I'm dying to hear. After Elena left, Catherine tidied her desk and reviewed upcoming appointments. One stood out, a discussion with Jonathan about revamping their HR training. She found herself more motivated than ever to propose a new program addressing the kinds of biases she'd personally experienced, framed in a way that offered tangible benefits to clients. At precisely 10 o'clock, Jonathan appeared at her doorway, giving a quick knock on the frame. Catherine, are you ready? She stood, smoothing her blazer. Absolutely. She followed him to a small conference room, mentally rehearsing her pitch. If all went well, she'd secure not just approval for a new training module, but a chance to drive real change in how businesses approached customer interactions. And maybe, she thought, she could help ensure that fewer people would have to endure the sort of indignity she had faced in that opulent, gleaming showroom. That afternoon, Catherine left Horizon Enterprises and headed to a small coffee shop just a few blocks away. The cafe's warm interior beckoned her out of the brisk wind, its cozy tables nestled under soft amber lighting. She had arranged to meet James Peterson here, curious to hear what he had to say. After ordering a chai latte, she chose a table by the window, where she could watch pedestrians hurry by. Within minutes, James walked in, scanning the room before spotting her. He offered a tentative smile, stepping toward her with a polite nod. He wore a neatly pressed shirt and tailored slacks, exuding the professionalism of a man who lived and breathed sales, but he also seemed uneasy, as though he carried a burden he wasn't entirely sure how to reveal. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair opposite her. She noticed the tension in his jaw, the subtle way he drummed his fingertips on the table. "Of course," Catherine replied. "I was a bit surprised by your text." "Is everything all right?" James let out a quiet sigh, as though summoning courage. I wanted to talk to you because, well, you're the first customer I've seen stand up to the environment at Elite Motors. The way Richard treated you, unfortunately, isn't isolated. I've seen it happen a dozen times. Sometimes it's worse." Catherine's chest tightened with empathy. She had suspected as much. Her experience could hardly be unique. "That's unfortunate," she said softly. "Why not speak up or leave for a dealership with a more equitable culture?" He glanced away, his expression conflicted. "I've thought about it, but Elite Motors pays well, and I have a family to support. I can't just quit. And Richard's sales record makes him almost untouchable. Management turns a blind eye." She sipped her latte, weighing her words carefully. "I understand it's not easy to walk away, but something has to change." James leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I want to help make that change, but I can't risk losing my job by going over Richard's head alone. I was hoping you, given your HR background, might have ideas on how to push for real policy improvements." Catherine blinked, taken aback by his directness. She recalled the training program she had proposed to Jonathan earlier that day, the one focusing on bias in customer-facing roles. Could that be part of the solution? My company does HR consulting, she explained. We're actually expanding a training module on unconscious bias. It covers everything from microaggressions to how prejudice impacts sales or customer satisfaction. Are you suggesting we bring something like that to Elite Motors? His eyes lit with cautious hope. Yes, exactly. If corporate higher-ups see that an outside consultant is offering solutions tied to revenue and customer retention, they might pressure Richard to change. Maybe it'll even force him to attend sessions or adopt new policies. Catherine mulled it over, a swirl of excitement mingling with hesitation. She could see the potential. Her negative experience might serve as a catalyst, sparking transformation beyond a single salesperson's attitude. I'd need data, examples, evidence to show how bias is hurting the dealership's bottom line, she said. From you, or from any colleagues who are willing to speak up. James nodded, lips pressed tightly. I've been documenting instances for a while, though not always officially. Notes, dates, situations where clients were steered toward cheaper models or outright ignored. Nothing's formally filed, but I can compile it. Be careful, she cautioned. I don't want you jeopardizing your livelihood. If you're discreet, though, your input could be crucial. He leaned back in his chair, relief mingling with apprehension. Thanks. It feels like maybe there's a real way forward now, but I'll need guidance. I've never dealt with corporate politics on this level. Catherine offered a small smile, setting down her empty latte cup. I can't promise miracles, but I'll do what I can. My boss, Jonathan, is supportive of rolling out broader bias training. If we can make a case that Elite Motors will benefit, we might get them on board. I also know someone who might be influential in the dealership's corporate chain. She briefly thought of Michael's mother, Eleanor, who occasionally invested in various businesses, but more significantly, how Michael's network might connect them to higher-level owners. James exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing a bit. Thank you, Catherine. This means a lot. Please keep me updated on any steps we can take. They exchanged phone numbers. Before leaving, Catherine gently touched his arm. I appreciate your honesty. It took courage to reach out. Let's see if we can turn a bad situation into something constructive. He managed a faint grin. That's all I want. With that, he picked up his coat and slipped out, disappearing into the busy sidewalk traffic. Catherine stayed behind for a moment, watching the swirl of people outside. Her heart pounded with a quiet resolve. For years, her work in HR had been about shaping fair policies and uplifting those whose voices often went unheard. Now, a personal brush with prejudice might be fueling the most meaningful project she'd tackled yet. If successful, it could protect countless future customers and employees from the kind of indignities she'd faced, and possibly even transform the very culture at Elite Motors from the inside out. As the week progressed, Catherine found herself juggling multiple tasks at Horizon Enterprises, while also delving deeper into the possibility of a training initiative tailored for Elite Motors. Each evening, she'd head home, open her laptop at the dining room table, and review the notes James had shared, dates, times, snippets of dialogue that painted a picture of bias, condescension, and sometimes outright discrimination. It was disheartening, yet it bolstered her determination to act. One Wednesday evening, she was engrossed in these notes when Michael walked in, coat draped over his arm. "Burning the midnight oil again?" he asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What are you working on?" Catherine paused, stretching her stiff neck. "Compiling examples of how Elite Motors treats customers," she said. "James gave me plenty of anecdotes, but I'm trying to organize them so they can be presented in a coherent way if I get the chance." Michael pulled a chair beside her. "I'm impressed," he said, skimming a document that recounted an incident where a woman in sweatpants was allegedly ignored for 20 minutes before walking out. But are you sure you want to go down this road? Might get messy. She clasped her hands together. I know, but if we never confront these patterns, they'll stay the same. Besides, I'm thinking of leveraging my proposal for expanded bias training at Horizon. If we can pitch it to Elite Motors as a pilot program, maybe we can set a precedent for other companies. He nodded, a slow grin forming. I like it. You've always had a gift for seeing the human side of corporate structures. Let me know how I can help. She leaned against him briefly, warmed by his offer. Thanks, she murmured. I might need it, especially if I run into obstacles or if Richard tries to stonewall everything. The next day, Catherine's phone buzzed with a troubling message from Sophia. Richard is trying to dig up reasons to fire me. Claims I mishandled a sale. I'm worried. Catherine felt her stomach drop. She'd suspected that standing up to Richard might have consequences for Sophia. Quickly, she replied, Hang in there. Don't sign anything or admit wrongdoing until we talk. At work, her concern for Sophia distracted her from an otherwise productive day. Jonathan Parker noticed her preoccupation during a quick budget meeting. Everything okay, Catherine? He asked, stepping aside with her afterward. You seem a bit off. Taking a moment to compose herself, Catherine decided to share the broad strokes. It's about the unconscious bias training we discussed. I have a lead on a potential pilot client, Elite Motors, but there's internal strife there that might complicate things. Jonathan stroked his chin thoughtfully. We have room in the departmental budget to develop specialized training materials. If you think you can secure a formal interest from them, I'll greenlight it. He paused, narrowing his gaze. But be careful. We don't want to get entangled in a legal mess. Have they actually requested our services yet? Not officially, Catherine admitted, but I have contacts who can connect me to the right people. Let me put out some feelers first. Jonathan nodded. All right, I trust your judgment. He offered a supportive pat on her shoulder before walking away. Buoyed by his backing, Catherine called Sophia during her lunch break to get more details on Richard's accusations. Sophia's voice trembled through the receiver. He says I processed a payment incorrectly last week, but I have all the receipts. I think it's just an excuse because he knows you specifically asked for me to handle the Q5 sale. Catherine could almost see the fear etched on Sophia's face. Stay calm, she advised. Document everything, including your conversation. If he tries to force a resignation, ask for any claims in writing. Then talk to me before you do anything else. After ending the call, Catherine felt a swell of anger. She abhorred how someone could weaponize job security to punish an employee for simply doing the right thing. This was precisely why structural changes were needed. Good people like Sophia shouldn't have to fear retaliation for treating customers fairly. That evening, Catherine and Michael sat down for a quiet dinner of homemade pasta. As they twirled spaghetti onto their forks, Catherine updated him on Sophia's plight. He frowned, setting his fork aside. That's rotten. Is there any way we can intervene more directly? Catherine mulled it over. I can't waltz in there and start quoting HR policy. But if the corporate ownership of Elite Motors gets wind of a potential scandal, especially if they see how it could hurt their reputation, they might step in. She hesitated, recalling a comment Michael had made about his mother, Eleanor Harris, having ties to various business interests in Seattle. Do you remember mentioning that Eleanor invests in local companies? Any chance she might be connected to Elite Motors' parent company? Michael's eyes widened slightly. She might be. I know she's got a stake in a few automotive ventures. He set down his napkin, nodding with a sense of purpose. I'll make a call, see what she knows. If she has influence, maybe we can encourage a higher-level review of how they treat employees and customers. Catherine managed a small smile, grateful for his willingness to help. Still, uncertainty gnawed at her. She had spent so much of her life avoiding leaning on wealthy connections, but this felt less like leveraging privilege and more like unveiling injustice. Her conscience whispered that if this was the only way to protect Sophia and push for broader change, then perhaps it was a worthy exception. A week later, Catherine found herself in an upscale conference room lined with tall windows that overlooked downtown Seattle. Floor-to-ceiling glass made the bustling streets below appear like a distant tapestry of movement. Inside, a long wooden table was set for a formal meeting, water pitchers, notepads, and sleek monitors for presentations. Sitting at that table was Mr. Matsuda, an imposing figure at 67, with a calm intensity in his dark eyes and a knack for reading people. He was the principal owner of the parent company that ran Elite Motors, among other dealerships. Catherine had arrived with her boss, Jonathan, who introduced her as the lead consultant for an HR project that could significantly benefit Mr. Matsuda's network of dealerships. Despite her usual composure, she felt a jolt of anxiety at the thought of confronting such a high-level figure. Yet, the moment Mr. Matsuda began speaking, his polite curiosity and measured tone put her at ease. Jonathan started the conversation, discussing Horizon Enterprises' track record in implementing progressive HR solutions. He explained how unconscious bias training could lead to improved customer satisfaction, reduced turnover among sales staff, and even higher profits. Mr. Matsuda listened intently, occasionally jotting notes on a tablet. Catherine caught the flicker of interest in his eyes whenever the word profit emerged, but she also sensed he cared about the underlying ethical implications. When Jonathan finished, he nodded to Catherine. She cleared her throat, launching into a concise overview of her experience at Elite Motors, though she carefully avoided naming individuals. Our research shows that small biases can accumulate, causing lost sales, damaged reputation, and low employee morale. One negative review spreads quickly, especially in the luxury market. Our program aims to address these biases directly, helping sales staff recognize and correct prejudicial behaviors. Mr. Matsuda's expression was thoughtful. I have heard rumblings of customer dissatisfaction, he conceded, folding his hands atop the table, particularly from certain dealerships under my umbrella. If this is indeed a systemic issue, addressing it could bolster both brand image and revenue. Catherine glanced at Jonathan, who gave her a subtle nod to proceed with the next point. We propose a pilot program at Elite Motors here in Seattle. If it proves successful, we can roll it out to your other dealerships. Our approach isn't about blame or punishment, it's about awareness and constructive behavioral shifts. Mr. Matsuda interlaced his fingers, studying Catherine closely. I respect your candor. To be transparent, we've had internal complaints about some of our top salespeople, issues relating to discrimination. I'm not fond of lawsuits or negative press. If you can minimize these risks while improving sales culture, I'm willing to listen. She exhaled, relief mixing with determination. That's precisely what we aim to do. Jonathan and Mr. Matsuda spoke for a few more minutes about logistical details, timelines, workshop structures, measurable outcomes. Catherine fielded his questions about how she would gauge success. Would they see a drop in complaints, a rise in customer satisfaction surveys? She explained that, yes, they'd use employee feedback, sales metrics, and customer follow-up data to assess the program's impact. Finally, Mr. Matsuda stood, gesturing for them to do the same. I will review the proposal with my executive team, he said, but I am inclined to move forward. It seems we share a desire to not only maximize profit, but to do so ethically. Catherine smiled, a small wave of accomplishment swelling inside her. Thank you for your consideration." After handshakes and polite farewells, she and Jonathan rode the elevator down to the building's lobby. The second the doors closed, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That went better than I expected," she remarked, giving Jonathan a hopeful grin. He chuckled, tapping the folder under his arm. "You impressed him with a mix of moral clarity and bottom-line logic. That's the language corporate owners speak." They stepped onto the sidewalk, greeted by a breeze that rustled the leaves of potted plants outside the building. As they parted ways, Jonathan clapped her lightly on the back. "Keep me posted. If we land this, you'll be the lead consultant, your name on the training materials, your expertise guiding their entire staff." Catherine waved goodbye, watching him head toward Horizon's nearby office tower. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her reverie. She saw a text from Sophia. "Richard found out someone spoke to corporate. He's tense, just an FYI." Pocketing her phone, Catherine felt a jolt of adrenaline. If Richard was on edge, that meant rumor of corporate's involvement was already trickling down. She could guess how he'd react, possibly lashing out at staff to maintain control. But the wheels of transformation were already turning at a higher level than he could easily manipulate. Her next step would be to ensure Sophia, James, and anyone else caught in the crossfire had enough backing to push through potential retaliation. It might be risky, but Catherine found she could no longer ignore how her personal experience had intertwined with her professional mission. In forging this new partnership, she was taking tangible steps toward dismantling the sort of prejudice that had once dismissed her as not looking rich enough. 2 weeks later, Catherine stood at the entrance of Elite Motors, a tablet in hand and a small team of HR specialists at her back. The dealership had never looked busier, cars gleaming under strategic lights, customers streaming through glass doors, and staff bustling about with a heightened sense of urgency. She could see a few new faces among the sales staff, presumably recent hires to meet demand. Yet there remained an undercurrent of tension, like a coiled spring ready to snap. This visit wasn't about buying a car. It was the first official training session under the pilot program approved by Mr. Matsuda. Catherine had spent hours refining the workshop materials, ensuring they combined engaging activities with research-based insights on unconscious bias. Standing beside her were 2 colleagues from Horizon Enterprises, Brian, who specialized in corporate diversity programs, and Leah, an experienced facilitator adept at navigating challenging group dynamics. Richard hovered near a corner of the showroom, looking stiff in a tailored grey suit. His expression fell somewhere between wariness and resentment, but he nodded curtly when Catherine caught his eye. Sophia, on the other hand, offered a subtle, encouraging smile as she guided other employees to a makeshift seating area set up near the back offices. James was there too, shooting Catherine a grateful glance. "Shall we get started?" Brian asked, keeping his tone bright to counter the palpable tension. "Let's do it," Catherine replied. They walked to the designated spot, a row of chairs lined up in front of a presentation screen. She noticed Richard standing behind everyone, arms folded. A few employees seemed curious, while others appeared defensive, as if they expected to be lectured. She recognized that winning them over required empathy and tact, not finger-pointing. After greeting them, Catherine dove into an introductory exercise. "Let's talk about first impressions," she said, projecting a short video that depicted various customers entering a store under different circumstances. In each scenario, employees either ignored or prioritized the person based on outward appearance. "I'd like to hear your reactions. Which customers in the video do you think ended up purchasing something expensive? Which ones didn't?" James spoke up first, clearing his throat. I guess the suit and tie guy would buy big ent, but it turned out he was just browsing. The woman in athletic wear bought the high-end merchandise. He paused, shaking his head. Kind of felt like a trick. Catherine offered a sympathetic smile. Exactly. Our assumptions can be misleading, and unconscious biases often lead us to treat customers differently, sometimes costing us a sale or harming the store's reputation. She moved on to a group discussion. Employees who rarely spoke up began sharing small anecdotes. A teenager who surprised them with her purchasing power, or an older couple wearing mismatched sweaters who turned out to be long-time collectors of luxury vehicles. Catherine carefully guided the conversation, highlighting how each story revealed a gap between snap judgments and reality. As the session progressed, the energy in the room shifted. Brian and Leah used role-playing activities to demonstrate how staff might inadvertently offend or alienate potential buyers. Even those who had initially appeared hostile started nodding in agreement. Catherine observed subtle moments of realization, furrowed brows relaxing, arms unfolding. The material was hitting home. From the back, Richard maintained his guarded stance, though his eyes occasionally flicked to the screen with interest. Catherine had decided not to single him out, understanding that confrontation could trigger defensiveness. Instead, she let the collective experience gently erode the old norms he'd set. Midway through, Sophia raised her hand tentatively. I just want to say that, as the only woman on the sales team, I felt that same bias internally, like sometimes I'm assumed to be less capable or better suited for easy customers. It's not just about how we treat buyers, but how we treat each other. A few co-workers nodded. Richard glanced at Sophia, but kept silent, a tense line forming around his mouth. Catherine seized the moment. That's an important point. Bias can manifest not only in customer interactions, but also among colleagues. Addressing these issues can improve the work environment for everyone. An hour later, the training session wrapped up with a short questionnaire designed to gauge employees' initial reactions. Leah invited them to share any final thoughts anonymously. Catherine reminded them that this was only the beginning. Further sessions and one-on-one follow-ups would ensue to solidify positive changes. When the group dispersed, Richard approached Catherine, his posture less rigid. That was informative, he said quietly, choosing his words with care. I'll admit I was skeptical at first. Catherine offered him a polite nod. I appreciate you sticking through it. I hope it sparks ideas on how to improve customer engagement. Everyone stands to benefit. He hesitated, as though weighing whether to say more. We'll see how it goes, he finally managed, glancing away. I'm, open to reviewing our policies, as Mr. Matsuda has requested. She sensed it wasn't a full concession, but a stepping stone. Thank you, she replied, keeping her tone measured. If you have questions or suggestions, you know where to find me. Before she could turn, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I've built a career on reading customers. Maybe I misread a few. I'm aware of that now. A flicker of something that might have been remorse passed across his face, and Catherine recognized a slow, difficult shift in a man long used to doing things his own way. She gave a small, encouraging smile, then stepped aside to join Sophia and James, who were tidying up the chairs. Sophia looked relieved, as if a huge weight had lifted off her shoulders. I think this might actually make a difference, she whispered, her eyes shining with hope. James nodded, offering Catherine a heartfelt thank you. It struck Catherine that a single workshop wouldn't magically reform an entire culture, but it was a critical first step. The real trial was ongoing, ensuring these insights became daily practice, protecting employees like Sophia from backlash, and reminding managers like Richard that a person's attire or demeanor did not equate to their worth. As she helped her team pack up their training materials, she felt the first stirrings of genuine optimism that Elite Motors, and perhaps other businesses, could become places where dignity trumped prejudice. A cool breeze drifted through the open window of Catherine's home office as she wrapped up a video call with Sophia. The sun was just setting over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of rose and tangerine. From her desk, Catherine could see the silhouette of her newly acquired Audi Q5 parked in the driveway. It felt surreal to compare this moment of calm to the turbulence of just a few weeks ago. Now, with the first wave of training at Elite Motors behind them, she sensed that many of the threads in her life were converging toward a new equilibrium. After bidding Sophia a cheerful goodnight, assuring her that additional support would follow, Catherine closed her laptop. She thought back to the day she'd first walked into that dealership in jeans and sneakers, how she had been overlooked as if her worth depended on designer labels. That memory had once filled her with indignation, but now it carried a different resonance. It had become the spark that ignited a broader quest for empathy and fairness, culminating in a training program that was steadily gaining traction beyond Elite Motors. She rose from her chair, stretching her arms overhead, and stepped into the hallway. Through the windows, she spotted Michael arriving in his own car. He parked beside her Q5 and exited with a warm smile that reached his eyes the moment he saw her watching from the doorway. In times past, she might have braced herself for his subtle hints that she upgrade her old Civic. Now, all those doubts about living authentically within their means felt distant. Her new SUV was a symbol of the balance they had finally achieved, a recognition of her worth, combined with her unwavering sense of self. Michael strolled in, dropping his keys on the small table near the entrance. "Busy day?" he asked, shrugging off his jacket. Catherine nodded, stepping forward to give him a brief hug. "Good busy, though," she replied. "I wrapped up a call with Sophia. She sounds more optimistic. She said the sales team has been more open-minded since our initial training workshop." He arched an eyebrow, genuine interest glowing on his face. "That's great to hear. Did she mention Richard at all? Is he coming around?" A small chuckle escaped her lips. "She said he's mellowing slightly. He isn't exactly Mr. Congeniality, but he's toned down the condescension. Apparently, corporate is keeping a close eye on performance metrics, and he's aware that his future might depend on how well he adapts." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes accountability is all it takes. Of course, real change goes beyond box-ticking, but it's a start." They wandered into the kitchen, where Catherine had left out the fixings for a simple salad and grilled chicken. While she chopped vegetables at the counter, Michael set the table, his movements easy and unhurried. It struck her how much their daily routines had evolved. Once upon a time, she might have insisted on doing everything herself to avoid feeling like an idle beneficiary of his success. Now they quietly shared tasks, each contributing in ways that felt natural. As they ate, talk shifted to the department Catherine was building at Horizon Enterprises, a specialized division dedicated to trainings on inclusivity and fair customer practices. Jonathan had recently proposed naming her as the official director of diversity and inclusion initiatives. The opportunity both excited and intimidated her. She explained it to Michael, describing her vision for expanding the program to other businesses across the city. He listened intently, occasionally offering a question or a gentle suggestion. "Are you concerned about taking on more responsibility?" he asked, swirling a fork through his salad. "A bit," Catherine admitted, "but it's not just about promotions. It's about shaping how companies handle unconscious biases. I keep thinking of how many people out there face daily barriers that remain invisible to those with more privileged backgrounds." Michael reached across the table, giving her hand a light squeeze. "You're passionate. That's what makes you so good at this. Remember, you're not alone. You'll have a team. And if you ever need an outside perspective, I'm here." She offered a grateful smile. "Thank you. I'll hold you to that." The conversation wound down as they finished their meal, clearing dishes with a relaxed teamwork that once again reminded her of the harmony they'd struck over the years. Later, they found themselves on the living room sofa, sipping herbal tea, while soft jazz played in the background. Michael scrolled through the day's financial news on his phone, occasionally reading out a headline. Catherine, by contrast, contemplated a spreadsheet on her own device, planning the next steps for the training rollout. When she finally set aside her tablet, her gaze drifted to a framed photo on the mantel. It captured a moment from their wedding, both of them laughing against a backdrop of cherry blossoms. She remembered how simple and genuine that day had been, how no amount of money or status could rival the sincerity they shared. After a peaceful silence, Michael placed a hand on her knee. "Penny, for your thoughts," he teased gently. Catherine turned to him, eyes soft. "I was just thinking about how everything feels like it's coming full circle. Once, I was the woman who hated the idea of luxury, and I still do, in many ways, if it's about flaunting wealth. But it's not about the car you drive or the clothes you wear. It's about your heart, your ethics, how you treat others. That's the real measure of who you are." He nodded, threading his fingers through hers. "And that's a lesson not just for you, but for everyone, myself included." They settled back into the sofa cushions, letting the evening unfold in quiet harmony. Even as the city's lights flickered through the windows, Catherine felt a profound sense of completion. She had started a necessary journey, one that, ironically, began when her battered Honda struggled in the rain, and found herself at a place where her principles and her reality aligned more fully than ever. Yet she sensed this was only the start of a larger impact she could have, reaching beyond her own life to reshape the mindsets of many. Under the fluorescent lights of a bustling convention center, Catherine stood beside a sleek poster displaying the logo of Horizon Enterprises. The bold letters spelled out Diversity and Inclusion Summit 2025, an event that drew HR professionals, business owners, and community leaders from across the region. She glanced around at the rows of booths, each one featuring companies touting new approaches to workplace equity and unconscious bias training. Today, Catherine was presenting on behalf of Horizon's newly minted Inclusive Excellence Division, the one Jonathan had entrusted her to lead. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation, drafting curricula, creating interactive modules, and recruiting a small but dedicated team. She felt an adrenaline rush, akin to stepping on a stage for the first time. Elena appeared at her side, handing over a stack of brochures. "We're getting a decent crowd stopping by," she noted, a grin lighting her features. "Several folks asked about your workshop with Elite Motors after reading that success story in the local business journal." Catherine gave a faint laugh. "Success story might be a strong phrase. It's still a work in progress, but I'll take the good publicity if it helps expand our reach." "That's the spirit," Elena replied, stepping aside to greet a pair of curious visitors. As Catherine prepared to launch into her next presentation, she felt a sense of pride, tempered by humility. A year ago, she had never imagined standing here as a subject matter expert on customer-focused bias training. Her work had mostly revolved around internal HR policies, but one moment of prejudice at a car dealership had sparked an entire movement in her life, urging her to innovate beyond corporate boundaries. Walking to the front of the booth, she switched on a slideshow that displayed some of the key metrics from the Elite Motors pilot program. Sales numbers had risen marginally, yes, but the more significant data told a deeper story. An increase in positive customer reviews, a drop in employee turnover, and an internal survey showing improved morale. Even more promising, The matrix of small changes, like adjustments in how staff greeted walk-ins or how they offered vehicle options, had contributed to a healthier work environment. Throughout the morning, a stream of conference attendees came and went, pausing to watch Catherine's demonstration of role-playing exercises or to ask questions about how they could adopt similar modules in their own organizations. She was mid-sentence, explaining the Empathy in Action workshop, when she noticed a familiar face in the crowd, Benjamin Winters, the business executive who had once swept into Elite Motors in a designer suit. Catching her eye, he lifted a hand in greeting. After she finished her segment, Catherine excused herself from a small group and approached Benjamin. "I didn't expect to see you here," she admitted, offering a polite smile. He returned the gesture. "We never really got a chance to talk back at the dealership, but I recall you standing there as Richard catered to me. I'm sorry about that. I had no idea." "It wasn't your fault," Catherine replied gently, "but I appreciate the acknowledgement." Benjamin nodded, crossing his arms. "I actually watched from the sidelines as things unfolded. When I heard about this summit, I decided to attend. My company's looking for ways to foster more inclusive customer relations, and rumor has it you're the person to talk to." Catherine's eyebrows lifted. She gestured for him to step aside so others could browse the booth. "I'd be glad to discuss it," she said earnestly. "We're in the process of scaling up. What kind of company do you run?" He explained that he was the CEO of a mid-sized tech firm specializing in data analytics. They frequently dealt with clients from diverse backgrounds, small businesses, non-profits, and large corporations. "I worry we might be overlooking how unconscious biases affect our software implementation process," he confessed. "We can't afford to alienate a chunk of our users." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "I can create a customized approach for you, focusing on user-centric design and how to address hidden assumptions in product development. Let's set up a follow-up call." They exchanged information, shaking hands in a meeting of mutual respect. "I look forward to it," Benjamin said, stepping aside to let another group approach. Shortly after, Catherine spotted Michael wandering toward the booth, having arrived to support her during his lunch break. He wore a light jacket and jeans, blending in with the casual vibe of the conference crowd. Elena greeted him with her usual cheerfulness, then drifted away to manage other visitors. Michael slipped an arm around Catherine's waist. "This is fantastic," he said, taking in the buzz around her display. "I'm proud of you." She felt a small flush of gratitude. "It's more than just me," she said, glancing at Elena, busy chatting with a local restaurant owner. "We're building a team, and the momentum is growing. We might even sign on more clients than we can handle at first. That's a good problem to have," he teased, leaning down to plant a light kiss on her temple. They strolled around the convention hall together, stopping to admire other booths that showcased initiatives around inclusive hiring or anti-discrimination policies. Catherine marveled at the collective drive in the room, people striving to reshape corporate landscapes in ways that honored humanity over superficial judgments. It was a vision that, not long ago, felt too idealistic for the real world. Eventually, they returned to Horizon's booth, where Eleanor beckoned Catherine over. "There's a business owner from Vancouver who wants to discuss a potential collaboration," she whispered excitedly. "Could be big." Michael stepped aside with a knowing grin. "Go dazzle them," he urged, crossing his arms in a show of supportive pride. Gathering her notes, Catherine approached the prospective partner, offering a handshake and a practiced introduction. Yet in her heart, each greeting felt fresh and vital, a testament to how far she had come from that rainy day when her old car died yet again, forcing her to walk into a showroom that had initially dismissed her. Every new connection now carried a quiet resonance, reminding her that change, however incremental, begins with the recognition of our shared human dignity. Early on a crisp Saturday morning, Catherine guided her Audi Q5 onto the I-5 highway, heading toward Portland. Michael accompanied her, gazing out at the evergreen trees whirring by in a blur of deep green. They made this drive every so often to visit Catherine's parents, who still lived in the modest neighborhood where she had grown up. The older Civic was long gone, replaced by the smooth hum of her newer SUV, a subtle but telling sign of how her life had evolved. As they neared Portland, Catherine felt her chest tighten with a blend of nostalgia and anticipation. She reflected on her family's simple roots. Her father, Robert, was a retired mechanic who'd once spent countless evenings tinkering with engines, hands stained with grease. Her mother, Patricia, had been a teacher who instilled the importance of empathy and compassion above all else. They had always been supportive, even when they didn't fully understand the complexities of Catherine's life in Seattle. Pulling into the driveway of her childhood home, Catherine spotted her parents waving from the porch. The house looked the same: white siding, a faded wooden swing, and pots of geraniums that her mother watered religiously. She parked the Audi carefully, feeling a rush of warmth at her parents' eager smiles. Michael hopped out first, greeting them with easy familiarity. Her father approached the Q5, running a hand along its sleek exterior. "So this is the new car," he mused, a hint of pride in his voice. "Looks like it's taken good care of you so far." Catherine laughed, stepping forward for a hug. "It has. Haven't had any breakdowns in a while." Her mother ushered them inside, insisting they stay for lunch. Over a rustic wooden table laden with sandwiches and fresh fruit, Catherine caught them up on life's latest developments, her new role at Horizon, the expansions in training, and even a few personal anecdotes about how she and Michael had navigated tensions with the dealership. Patricia leaned forward, eyes shining with curiosity. "I'm proud that you're using your experiences to help other people. I always knew you'd find a way to combine your empathy with your professional skills." Robert nodded in agreement, taking a hearty bite of his sandwich. "Your mother's right, and we're glad you're not letting your financial situation change who you are. It's good to see you still care about fairness, especially in businesses that might not welcome everyone equally." Michael chimed in, recounting how Catherine had insisted on keeping her appearance low-key despite everything. "She's taught me as much about humility as I have about investments," he joked, earning a fond smile from Catherine. The afternoon unfolded in a comfortable rhythm. Later, while Michael stayed indoors discussing local sports with Robert, Catherine joined her mother in the backyard, where a small vegetable garden thrived. Patricia knelt to pull weeds, her voice soft. "I heard from your brother, David. He says he's doing better now. Found a part-time job teaching art at a community center." Catherine's face lit up. David had long struggled to make ends meet, relying on her occasional financial support. "That's wonderful news," she breathed, relieved. "Maybe this time he'll stick with it." Patricia nodded, removing a handful of weeds and tossing them aside. "He said you inspired him, mentioned how you stood up for yourself and others at that dealership. It seems to have given him a nudge to stop letting life push him around." Catherine found herself momentarily speechless. She wouldn't have guessed her personal stand could ripple out in ways that might help David. Feeling a tug of emotion, she helped her mother replant a small lavender bush. The act felt symbolic, nurturing growth in a place that had nurtured her own roots. When they returned indoors, Catherine noticed her father eyeing her with quiet affection. "Your old bedroom's still how you left it," he said, nostalgia coloring his voice, "though we did move some boxes in there after you got married." She peeked inside, smiling at the faint pastel walls and a bookshelf filled with her childhood novels. On one shelf stood a photograph of her at 16, beaming proudly as she held up a learner's permit. Another shot captured her wearing overalls, covered in car grease as she helped Robert fix a battered old engine. The memory sent a wave of gratitude washing over her. Eventually, she and Michael prepared to leave, hugging her parents goodbye at the threshold. Robert patted her shoulder, his gaze meeting hers with a sincerity that made her chest tighten. "Keep doing what you're doing, Kat. You're making a difference." Her mother smiled through misty eyes. "We love you." Once on the road, Catherine's thoughts drifted between the old and the new, her father's workshop lessons, her mother's unwavering empathy, and the modern life she'd built in Seattle. She reflected on how each piece of her history now fit into a larger tapestry of self-discovery and social impact. Michael glanced over, one hand on the steering wheel. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah. I'm just thinking about how none of this would have happened if my Civic hadn't started falling apart. It's funny, really, how the toughest moments can turn into something meaningful." His gaze softened, understanding in his eyes. "That's the beauty of life, isn't it? We find purpose in the most unexpected places." Resting her head against the seat, she let the hum of the highway lull her into a gentle calm. For so long, she had feared that stepping into a world of privilege might erode her values. Instead, the journey had brought her closer to them, forging a legacy that balanced compassion with influence. And now, as she and Michael headed back to Seattle, she felt more certain than ever that their shared path would continue to expand in ways both humble and grand. 1 year after the incident at Elite Motors, Catherine found herself once again pulling into the dealership's parking lot. This time, however, she came not as a skeptical customer or an outside consultant, but as a satisfied client scheduled for a routine service check on her Audi Q5. The difference in atmosphere greeted her before she even stepped out of the car. There was an air of openness, staff members in neat uniforms welcoming smiles at the ready, and a distinct absence of that tense, status-conscious feeling she recalled from her initial visits. She parked in a space reserved for service appointments. Turning off the engine, gathering her keys and her handbag, she emerged under a soft spring sun. A young employee hustled over to greet her, politely offering to guide her to the service desk. Catherine noted no trace of condescension, only a genuine willingness to help. Inside, the showroom glistened much as it always had, but Catherine sensed an intangible shift in the energy. Sophia, now in a crisp navy blazer, approached with a bright grin. "Welcome back! The Q5's looking great. Ready for that scheduled maintenance?" Catherine nodded. "Absolutely. How have you been, Sophia? I hear big congratulations are in order." Sophia's cheeks flushed with pride. "Yes, I've been promoted to sales manager for our new performance division. It's still sinking in." Catherine felt a rush of happiness for the young woman, remembering how precarious her job once was under Richard's scrutiny. "That's fantastic. You deserve it." Gesturing for Catherine to follow, Sophia led her toward a renovated customer lounge, an area that now featured comfortable seating, fresh coffee, and large windows that overlooked a row of gleaming vehicles. The decor was modern but not ostentatious, designed to make clients feel at ease rather than intimidated. As they walked, a figure approached from the corner of the showroom, Richard Warner himself. He looked thinner, a bit grayer at the temples, but composed. A half-smile tugged at his lips as he neared. Catherine tensed slightly, unsure of his motive, but he only extended a hand in greeting. "Mrs. Harris." "Good to see you." She accepted his handshake, noticing how he kept his tone polite, if a bit reserved. "Hello, Richard," she replied, her voice steady. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to mention that I've transferred to another branch. Today's actually my last day here. New beginnings," he added, his gaze flicking to Sophia with a mixture of regret and respect. "She's taking over much of the sales floor." Catherine offered a cordial nod. "I heard. I wish you well." There was a pause, during which Richard seemed on the verge of saying something more personal. Ultimately, he gave a curt nod and stepped aside, as though acknowledging his former role and the end of his dominance at this dealership. Sophia led Catherine on, explaining that she would handle the service paperwork. Once they were seated in the lounge, Sophia asked if Catherine wanted coffee or water. "I'm fine," Catherine said, her eyes wandering to the view of customers milling about, many in casual attire. Each one appeared to be treated with professional courtesy, regardless of how they looked. It was precisely the kind of environment she had hoped to see. Minutes later, a technician stepped in, confirming details about the Q5's mileage and maintenance history. The exchange was smooth and pleasant. As the technician left, Sophia took a seat near Catherine. "I just want you to know that the training sessions you and your team introduced made a huge difference. It wasn't just a one-time thing. We kept implementing changes, developing new policies for how we greet and assist clients, and, as you can see, it's paid off." Catherine felt a warmth spread through her chest. "That's wonderful," she said simply. "I'm happy it's working." Sophia leaned forward, hands clasped. "It's not just about selling cars anymore. It's about building real relationships. Our customer satisfaction scores have never been higher, and ironically, sales went up too." A smile broke across Catherine's face. "That doesn't surprise me. When you treat people with respect, it shows in the bottom line." Sophia nodded, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Exactly. And it all started when you walked in here that first day, refusing to let yourself be dismissed. I know it was unpleasant for you, but it triggered the wake-up call this place needed." Catherine considered the quiet irony. A humiliating moment had spiraled into widespread improvements, not just for her, but for countless other customers and employees. The journey had involved more than a few moments of anger and self-doubt, but seeing the results now made it feel worthwhile. They parted when a service representative arrived to collect the Q5's keys. Catherine sat down to wait, recalling the many twists and turns that led her here, from her breakdown-prone Civic to the rare Bugatti Cameo, from heated confrontations to behind-the-scenes negotiations. The path had been anything but simple, yet the underlying truth remained straightforward. Treat people as people, not as walking wallets or social trophies. Eventually, the car was ready, freshly inspected and serviced. As Catherine stepped outside, the late morning sun warmed her face. She took a final glance at the Elite Motors sign, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. This dealership, once a stage for her wounded pride, had become a testament to growth and transformation. With that, she settled into the driver's seat of her Audi and started the engine. The purr of its motor both familiar and reassuring. Easing out of the parking lot, she allowed herself a final reflection. Real wealth was never about the car she drove or how much she could afford. It was about the values she upheld and the relationships she nurtured. Lessons once taught by her parents in their modest home and now carried forward in her new, quietly confident life. And as she merged onto the main road, Catherine felt a wellspring of peace. She was heading into the future armed with both a strong moral compass and the means to protect and uplift others. The dealership faded in her rearview mirror, replaced by a horizon wide with possibilities. The once humbling rain had cleared, leaving her to navigate a sunlit path with a heart full of purpose, knowing the most enduring luxury of all lay in treating others with unwavering dignity. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.